Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Returned to Face the Past? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. The silence of the hospital room was a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was a silence Midoriya Izuku had known intimately since before he could remember, punctuated only by the rhythmic beep-beep-beep of the monitors beside his bed. He traced the faded, peeling sticker of an All Might logo on the aluminum railing next to him, his thumb running over the smooth vinyl, worn down by years of boredom. He was 18 now, officially an adult, yet his world remained defined by these four white walls, the smell of disinfectant, and the soft green glow of the 4-drip feeding into his arm. Today, the doctor had used words like improvement and discharge schedule, words that should have sounded like freedom but instead felt like an earthquake, terrifying and unstable. Izuku shifted, pulling the thin, scratchy blanket closer. His mother, Inko, slept soundly in the armchair beside him, her head resting against the backrest, exhausted by her decades-long vigil. The sight of her weary, familiar face, always creased with worry, even in sleep, triggered a familiar ache in his chest, one that had nothing to do with his lungs. The prospect of leaving this room, of truly entering the world he'd only watched through sterile glass, brought with it a phantom panic attack. His breath hitched, not from illness, but from a sudden, cold memory. He closed his eyes, and the white ceiling dissolved, replaced by a blinding summer sun and the echoing sound of a child's laughter. The world was bright, loud, and smelled like dust and freshly cut grass. Izuku was 6, small for his age, with messy green hair and a bright smile that hadn't yet been crushed by the weight of sickness. He was hunched over a pile of loose dirt and small stones in Bakugo Katsuki's backyard, meticulously arranging a border for the fortress they were building. "No, Deku, the turret goes here," Katsuki snarled, though his tone held more enthusiastic command than actual malice. He jabbed a triumphant, tiny finger at a section of the dirt mound. Katsuki was a firework even then, all sharp edges, loud pronouncements, and boundless, aggressive energy. Katsuki held his prized possession, a small, meticulously crafted toy soldier made of painted pewter and brass. It wasn't the kind of plastic figure you bought in a store. It was heavy, detailed, and obviously expensive. It was the general, the commander of their imaginary army. If the commander is on the western flank, we'll be exposed on the ridge. Izuku argued, his voice high-pitched and earnest. He was always drawn into Katsuki's ambitious games, always trying to match his friend's intensity, even if he usually ended up playing the subordinate. "It's a decoy, you idiot. They'll think the main force is there, then boom. My side kicks their buttes," Katsuki declared, his grin wide and feral. He planted the pewter general firmly on the edge of the dirt mound and stepped back to admire his tactical genius. Izuku laughed, a sound that felt foreign and beautiful to his current, sterile reality. He reached out to nudge the side of the fortress, intending to solidify the dirt wall near where Katsuki had placed the general. It happened in a fraction of a second, an irreversible sequence of tragic, childish misjudgment. Izuku's hand was moving too fast. Instead of gently patting the dirt, his clumsy fingers bumped the tiny brass figure. The heavy soldier tipped, rolled down the steep embankment of the dirt mound, and landed with a sickening crack against the corner of a sharp, buried stone. Silence. Katsuki stared. Izuku stared. The pewter general's arm, the one holding its tiny sword, was cleanly broken off and lay a few inches away in the dirt, the gleaming brass glinting mockingly in the sun. For a moment, neither boy moved. The air went thick, draining all the easy joy out of the summer afternoon. "Kaken," Izuku whispered, his eyes wide and filling with immediate hot tears. "I didn't mean to. I am so sorry. Katsuki's face crumpled, transforming instantly from cocky commander to betrayed victim. His jaw clenched and his eyes welled up, but the tears never fell. Instead, his grief turned instantaneously into rage, the first true, terrifying rage Izuku had ever experienced from him. "You idiot! You clumsy, worthless Deku!" Katsuki screamed, his voice raw. He dropped to his knees, snatching up the broken toy and cradling it fiercely. "This was mine. You always ruin everything." The words, harsh and sudden, slammed into Izuku with the force of a physical blow. The shame, the terror of having broken something so precious to the person who was his whole world, was paralyzing. "I didn't. I'll fix it. I'll buy you a new one." Izuku stammered, his arms flailing uselessly. "You can't buy a new one. My dad gave it to me." "You broke it. You just break things." Katsuki roared, launching himself forward, pushing Izuku hard in the chest. Izuku stumbled backward, his feet catching on a stray root. The shame and the sudden physical effort, the screaming, the running, the panic all converged. His small lungs, already prone to issues, seized up. The sound of Katsuki's raw, angry crying faded, replaced by a deafening high-pitched whistle in his chest. "I can't breathe." His hands flew to his throat. His throat felt like it was closing up, squeezing shut around the air he desperately needed. The world tilted and blurred, the bright sun turning into a sickly yellow haze. He tried to call out, to apologize again, but only a desperate, choked gasp escaped. He was hyperventilating, his body rejecting the oxygen it craved. He vaguely registered the back door of Katsuki's house slamming open. Inko's voice, sharp, panicked, tearing through the air, followed by the deeper, rushing sound of Mitsuki and Masaru Bakugo. But the sounds were underwater. All Izuku could feel was the agonizing, clawing need for air. He crumpled into the dirt, his small body convulsing as his heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against his ribs. His last coherent thought, before the dark swallowed the sunlight and the panicked faces rushing toward him: "I broke the toy, and now I'm broken too." Izuku opened his eyes with a gasp that was sharp and rattling, feeling the familiar, terrifying tightness in his chest. But the sound of the monitors remained steady, beep beep beep. He was here. He was safe. His mother, awakened by his sudden intake of breath, was instantly alert. "Izuku? Sweetie, what is it? Are you okay?" Inko asked, her voice thick with sleep and immediate, ingrained anxiety. She was already reaching for the nurse call button. "Fine, Mum," Izuku croaked, forcing his breathing to slow, focusing on the cool, steady air pumped into the room. "Just a bad dream." A bad dream that was a memory. The memory of the last time he had truly seen the full, raw emotion on Katsuki's face, the anger and pain that his sickness had instantly overridden and then sealed forever. The memory of the look that said, "You ruin things, Izuku." The fight, the collapse, the subsequent long stay in the hospital, it had been the final, definitive end to their friendship. After that, his mother had been a fortress, terrified of any stress or exertion that might trigger another attack. She shielded him from everything, especially from the volatile energy of Katsuki. He glanced at his mother, whose hand was still hovering near the button, her eyes wide with fear. "You break things." Izuku knew the move to college, the move into the real world, would shatter the fragile peace his mother had created. It meant facing the consequences of his own history. It meant risking the life he had fought so hard to keep. And it meant, perhaps, that one day soon he would run into the boy who had once been his whole world. He didn't know if he was strong enough to face Katsuki Bakugo again, or if the lingering trauma of that collapsed moment in the sunlight would finally break him for good. He took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing the memory back into the shadows. "Mom," he said, his voice stronger now. "Tell me again what I need to pack for the dorm." The fluorescent lights of the hospital room hummed overhead, a sound Izuku hadn't consciously noticed until he was packing his last few belongings into a worn, canvas duffel bag. 2 weeks had passed since the final discharge papers were signed, and yet, the transition from patient to student felt impossibly steep. Inko hovered near the small window, clutching a neatly folded emergency contact list like a life raft. Her anxiety was a palpable thing, thick and buzzing in the air, a constant counterpoint to Izuku's quiet excitement. "Are you sure you packed the emergency nebulizer in the backpack, Izuku?" she asked for what felt like the 10th time. "Not the suitcase. You need it immediately accessible. And did you double-check the lock on the pill organizer?" Izuku paused his task of sorting through textbooks, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Mom, it's all organized. Dr. Sato and the college nurse went over everything with us 3 times. He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. The mini nebulizer is in the front pouch, and the pill case is color-coded. I promise. The core of her worry, he knew, wasn't about the packing. It was about the distance. For 18 years, she had been his immediate shield, his medical monitor, and his entire world. Now, she was handing him over to a single dorm room and a campus full of strangers. His medical history was complicated, centered around severe respiratory issues coupled with a diagnosis of arrhythmia since early childhood. The collapsing incident with Katsuki had been a perfect storm: emotional shock, intense hyperventilation, and the sudden, erratic spike in his heart rate. Even though his respiratory function was stabilized now, the arrhythmia meant his heart retained a dangerous, unpredictable element. His daily maintenance routine was exhaustive. On the small, folding tray table beside his bed lay the final assembly of his survival kit, neatly arranged for transfer. The blister pack of beta blockers to keep his heart rhythm steady. The inhalers, color-coded for prevention versus emergency response. A small vial of fast-acting painkillers for the inevitable tension headaches and residual body aches that plagued him after a rough night. Izuku sighed softly, masking the weariness that sometimes accompanied his mother's endless vigilance. I know you're scared, Mom, he said, turning to face her fully. But I'm going to be okay. This college has an amazing medical center right across the street from the dorms. I have the bracelet with the QR code listing my full history. I am prepared. Inko's eyes, usually so soft, were bright with unshed tears. It's not the preparation, Izuku. It's the being alone. What if you have a flare-up and there's no one to hear you? What if someone stresses you out? Her voice dropped to a frantic whisper. What if you see him? The unspoken name hung heavy between them. Katsuki Bakugo. I'll be fine, Izuku repeated, his voice firm, though he felt a faint tremor in his own hand. I'm an adult now. I can manage my own stress. And the chances of running into Katsuki in a city this big are practically zero. He knew that was a lie. This city was big, but the universe had a cruel sense of humor. He just needed to be ready. The drive to the university dorms felt less like an exciting journey and more like a carefully controlled medical transport. Inko drove painfully slow, observing every traffic light and pedestrian with intense scrutiny. The world rushing by outside the window, the bustling shops, the groups of laughing students, the sheer volume of life was intoxicating and terrifying. The radio was playing Tragedy by Dhruv. 'Cause I'm trying not to think, but I always will. Playing out the scene in my head for an empty thrill. Feeling like the main character, but I'm in my own tragedy. Why'd you do this to me? Izuku, thinking too hard about the song, why did he have be in this tragedy? When they finally arrived at the sprawling, red brick college campus, Inko parked the car with the precision of a bomb technician. She didn't move immediately. Look, Izuku, she whispered, pointing toward a group of boisterous students wrestling with a heavy mattress. See how rough they are? You have to stay away from crowds. You need a quiet routine. No late nights. And please, promise me you won't exert yourself by climbing too many stairs. I have the elevator key card, Mom, Izuku said, managing a smile. I promise to be responsible. I'm going to take this slow. He knew the only way to calm her was to submit to her checklist, not to fight it. He gently took her hand. But I need you to let me try. A silent tear finally escaped Inko's eye, tracking a path down her cheek. You're my heart, Izuku. You always have been. The thought of you here without me. She couldn't finish the sentence. They started the grueling process of moving his belongings. It wasn't the physical labor that exhausted Izuku, but the relentless, atmospheric weight of his mother's fear. Room 4B was small, brightly lit, and impersonal. It smelled faintly of old carpet and new paint. Midoriya's single bed was tucked against the wall, and a basic wooden desk sat beneath a large window overlooking a quad busy with orientation activity. The next few hours were spent transforming the sterile space into a functional base camp. Izuku took charge of setting up his personal medical station on the top shelf of the bookcase, well away from any accidental spills or dust. He lined up his prescription bottles, the beta blockers, the small, orange and white capsules of muscle relaxers, the emergency rescue medication. He arranged them not out of a sense of dread, but out of disciplined necessity. They were the tools that granted him this freedom. "And look," he said, pulling a lanyard out of a small pouch. It held a sleek, black emergency bracelet. "This connects directly to the campus health service. It's monitored 24/7. I'm never truly alone, Mom." Inko watched him affix the bracelet to his wrist, the gesture of preparedness bringing a modicum of comfort. She was meticulously unpacking his clothes, smoothing every crease, and pausing with concern when she saw the faded, worn All Might t-shirt he had insisted on bringing. "You really want to wear that old thing?" she asked gently. "It's lucky," Izuku replied, smiling. It was a piece of his childhood, a reminder of the time when he believed heroes could fix everything before he learned that some breaks were permanent. Finally, the room was set. The bed was made, the books were shelved, and the medical supplies were ready. The time for his mother to leave had arrived. She hugged him then, a tight, desperate embrace that squeezed the breath from his lungs. "Call me every night, Izuku. Even if it's just for 2 minutes. Don't push yourself. Please, be careful with your heart." "I promise, Mom," he mumbled into her shoulder. "I love you." After she left, the silence that fell over the room was different from the hospital's silence. This silence was vast, open, and buzzing with possibility. It was his. Izuku walked over to the desk, pulled out his chair, and reached for his backpack. He opened the main compartment and, instead of a textbook, he pulled out a small, flat jewelry box. Inside, carefully wrapped in tissue, was a small, tarnished piece of brass, the broken arm of Katsuki's pewter general. He had kept it all these years, a tangible anchor to the moment his life split in two. "The chances of running into him are 0, he had told his mother. He gently placed the broken piece of brass back into the box, closed it, and slipped it into the bottom drawer of his desk. He took a deep breath, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath his ribs. "I'm here now," he thought. "Let's see what happens." The silence in room 4B was no longer merely a lack of noise. It was the quiet potential of a fresh start. Izuku sat at his new desk, the afternoon sun casting sharp rectangles across the cheap wooden surface. His backpack lay open beside him, smelling faintly of new paper and recycled plastic. His mother had been gone for only an hour, yet already the air felt lighter, less pressurized. He picked up the printout of his fall course schedule, a dense block of text and times that represented his first true, independent intellectual endeavor. He smoothed the creases, his fingers tracing the bold letters of his chosen major, forensic science. He had settled on it after years of reading case studies and medical journals in the hospital, his mind craving the kind of cold, objective logic his own body so often denied him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent 18 years battling internal, unpredictable breakdowns, a chaotic, emotional war waged within his own fragile system. Now, he was choosing to study chaos in the outside world, searching for clarity and truth among the scattered fragments of crime, biology, and chemistry. He wanted to understand the why and the how of irreversible damage. He pinned the schedule above his desk with 2 small, silver thumbtacks, organizing his week into a grid of color-coded highlighter marks. Daytime course. Monday morning forensic biology. Morning English composition. Tuesday afternoon criminalistics, lab. Afternoon general chemistry lab. Wednesday late afternoon psychology of crime. Late afternoon statistics and probability. Thursday late afternoon forensic chemistry. Late afternoon ethics and philosophy. Friday afternoon internship prep seminar. Afternoon introduction to psychology. He leaned back in his chair, scanning the comprehensive list. The sheer intellectual density of the schedule hit him: 9 courses spanning the highly technical, forensic chemistry, statistics, and the deeply abstract, ethics and philosophy, psychology of crime. It was a crushing load, even for a healthy student. For him, it felt almost audacious. The familiar, cold anxiety began to curl in his stomach, a physical reaction that always preceded the tightening in his chest. The arrhythmia. He immediately placed a hand over his heart, forcing himself to breathe in for a count of 4, hold for 4, and exhale for 6. 9 classes. Lab sessions. Late afternoon lectures on consecutive days. What was I thinking? He pictured his mother's face, her constant, terrified question. What if you stress yourself out? He was stressing himself out. He was trading the controlled, predictable environment of the hospital for a demanding, intellectually rigorous schedule designed to push students to their limits. His physical fragility and the unpredictable nature of his heart condition made this choice seem reckless. Forensic chemistry on Thursday, followed immediately by ethics and philosophy, meant he wouldn't finish his academic day until almost 6:30 p.m. Then he had to manage dinner, readings, and the preparation for his Friday lab seminar. This wasn't just a challenge, it was a tightrope walk over his health limits. He slid open his desk drawer and pulled out the small, color-coded pill organizer. He flipped open the compartment marked Monday, reminding himself of the routine he could not miss. The small, white beta blocker was there, his daily chemical anchor to stability. The key is control, he thought, repeating the mantra that had kept him sane in the hospital. I am a scientist now. I am in charge of the data. He had planned this. He hadn't chosen these courses blindly. He chose the late afternoon and evening classes specifically to avoid the busiest, most crowded rush times in the morning and lunch hours, minimizing the risk of accidental physical contact or the sensory overload that could trigger a panic response. He chose courses that forced him to utilize logic and detachment, hoping to build up an emotional shield against the world's harsh unpredictability. He picked up his notebook and began transferring the schedule, adding detailed notes about the location of each building and the quickest, flattest, and most low-traffic routes between them. He made a note in the margin next to the Tuesday Criminalistics Lab: locate emergency access points and nearest fire exit. Map shortest path to Campus Health Center from the Science Building. The scientific approach to self-preservation. Stop it, Izuku, he commanded himself mentally, his grip tightening on the pen. He consciously shifted his focus from the potential danger to the intellectual feast laid out before him. Forensic biology, the elegant, silent story told by a strand of hair or a drop of blood. Psychology of crime. Finally understanding the twisted motives and behavioral patterns of why humans hurt each other, a question that had haunted him ever since Katsuki's words of childhood rage had cut him so deeply. Ethics and philosophy, the course he was most nervous about. He was going to have to talk, to debate, to expose his nascent, untested worldviews to others. His heart gave a small, nervous flutter beneath his hand. He closed his eyes and returned to his breathing exercise. Inhale 4. Hold 4. Exhale 6. When he opened his eyes, he looked not at the demanding schedule, but past it, out the window. Students were walking across the quad, their laughter occasionally drifting up to his 4th-floor room. They looked normal, healthy, and utterly oblivious to the internal clock ticking inside his chest. This is why I'm here, he thought. To prove I don't just survive, I live. His illness, the arrhythmia, and the lifetime of physical fragility were facts, variables he had to account for. But they were not the whole equation. He had survived the hospital, he had survived the collapse, and he had survived the years of isolation. He had the sharpest mind in the room, and he had a relentless drive for knowledge. He reached down and gently touched the emergency bracelet on his wrist. It was a lifeline, but he refused to see it as a limit. He picked up a crisp, new notebook, its pages pristine and inviting. He wrote the heading Forensic Biology, Monday morning, and below it, he wrote a single, steady affirmation. I will not let fear be the limiting factor in my equation. He would manage the risk. He would follow the plan. And if, in the pursuit of his dream, his heart decided to act up, he had the medicine, the training, and the logic to fight back. He had to. This was his only chance to prove that the fragility of his body did not diminish the resilience of his mind. He picked up his General Chemistry I textbook, the weight of the book reassuringly heavy in his hands. He smiled a small, determined quirk of his lips. The college life had begun, and Izuku Midoriya was ready to analyze the data. The next day, a deep Sunday stillness settled over the dorm building, broken only by the distant sounds of students moving boxes or the faint murmur of music playing Kilby Girl by the backseat lovers. Monday felt simultaneously too close and impossibly far away. Izuku had consciously dedicated the day to rest and preparation, trying to bank energy for the intensive week ahead. He needed his body to be as stable and cooperative as possible. He lay stretched out on his bed, the sterile hospital sheets replaced by a soft, if slightly threadbare, comforter he had brought from home. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting stripes across his room. His mind, however, refused to rest, running endless simulations of his upcoming routes and social interactions. His phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand. He didn't even need to look to know who it was. Mom, 5:05 p.m. Did you eat dinner? Are the blinds closed? The sun is intense today. Mom, 5:08 p.m. Please text me your current heart rate if you have a wearable monitor on. Mom, 5:15 p.m. I saw that campus had a rally today. Did you stay inside? I don't want you near crowds. Izuku picked up the phone, a small, weary sigh escaping him. His mother's worry wasn't just protective, it was a physical manifestation of her inability to detach, a constant reminder of his vulnerability. Izuku, 5:17 p.m. Hi Mom. I ate a sandwich and an apple. I was inside all day. My heart rate is fine. I'm just resting. He pressed send and immediately set his phone face down. He knew the relief of receiving his text would last approximately 45 minutes before the next wave of anxiety hit her, prompting another stream of messages. He loved her fiercely, but sometimes her love felt like the last set of restraints holding him back. To distract himself, he picked the phone back up and began mindlessly scrolling through his chosen social feed. He rarely posted anything, preferring to use the platform as a quiet observer, watching the world he was preparing to join. He saw posts about campus orientation events, photos of shared meals, and snippets of excited chatter about Monday's classes. He was thumbing past a generic post from the university's athletics department, a long list of recent collegiate sports results, when his finger froze. The image was a high-quality photograph, clearly taken by a professional sports photographer. The setting was an outdoor track, the lane lines still crisp and visible behind the subject. The subject was leaning back, chest heaving slightly, caught in the immediate, triumphant aftermath of exertion. It was Bakugo Katsuki. Izuku's breath hitched, not in panic this time, but in sheer shock. The tightness returned to his chest, but it felt less like distress and more like an electrical charge. He lowered his phone instinctively, trying to regain control, then brought it back up, zooming in on the image. The caption confirmed it. Freshman sensation Katsuki Bakugo takes first place in the men's 100-meter dash at the regional qualifiers, clocking a blistering 10.15 seconds for the Wildcats. Katsuki was holding a gold medal, not wearing it, but biting the edge of it with a fierce, almost predatory smirk. Sweat plastered his ash-blonde hair to his forehead, and his expression was pure, unadulterated triumph. He looked different. The essential Katsuki was still there, the explosive energy, the challenge in his eyes, the sheer, blinding confidence. But the boy in the picture was hardened, chiseled, and undeniably magnificent. Sharper, his shoulders wide and powerful from years of intense training. The boy who had thrown rocks and dirt in a backyard tantrum was gone, replaced by an athlete who channeled all his aggression into blinding speed and disciplined power. He looked like the physical antithesis of Izuku himself. Where Izuku was delicate, careful, and prone to internal collapse, Katsuki was raw, visceral strength. He was everything Izuku couldn't afford to be: reckless, fast, and intensely physical. Izuku felt a wave of unexpected heat rise to his face. It was the same mixture of awe, envy, and complicated admiration he had felt as a 6-year-old watching Katsuki flawlessly execute a move during their games. He actually did it, Izuku thought, a genuine, bittersweet pride swelling in his chest. He took all that incredible potential and made himself into a true winner. The image of the pewter general's broken arm flashed across his mind, followed by the memory of Katsuki's tear-streaked face twisted in rage. "You break things." Izuku stared at the victorious smirk on the screen. The shame and fear from that memory usually paralyzed him, but seeing this polished, successful version of Katsuki did something unexpected. It made the trauma feel smaller, more contained, like a story that only Izuku still remembered. Katsuki had clearly moved on, achieving the high peaks Izuku had always believed him destined for. He scrolled through the comments beneath the picture. They were full of praise, awe, and competitive chatter. Bakugo is going pro, easy. The fastest man on campus, hands down. He's cold as ice, but God, he wins. Cold as ice. That phrase resonated with Izuku. The triumphant smirk on the medal photo was confident, but it lacked the easy, childish joy of the laughter he remembered from the sandbox. There was a hardness there, a distance that had replaced the volatile passion. It suggested that maybe, just maybe, the years had left a mark on Katsuki too, even if it wasn't visible as a physical scar. Izuku lay his phone down again, this time placing it carefully on his chest. His heart rate, he noted, was elevated, but steady, a controlled, excited flutter. Not panic. Not arrhythmia. Just recognition. The chances of running into him were not zero. They were, in fact, remarkably high. This was a university large enough to house a top-tier track program, but small enough that an athlete of Bakugo's caliber would be visible, renowned. They were both freshmen. They were both here. A small, thrilling fear pulsed through Izuku. He had planned his college life meticulously, accounting for every medical variable, every academic demand, every low-traffic route. He had prepared for forensic chemistry labs and philosophical debates. He had not prepared for the inevitable, explosive encounter with Katsuki Bakugo. I have to be ready, he thought, taking a deep, steadying breath. If he's here, I have to be the adult I plan to be, not the scared kid who collapsed in the dirt. He reached for his backpack, pulling out his English composition textbook. He needed to ground himself in logic, in structure, in the rigorous mental effort that defined his new life. He needed to be the scientist, not the patient. Monday morning was approaching, and with it, the beginning of a life that was already deviating wildly from his carefully drawn map. He started reading about thesis statements and paragraph organization, determined to keep his mind focused and stable, even as the image of the intense, gold-biting athlete burned bright behind his eyelids. The game was starting, and the rules had just changed. Monday morning arrived bathed in a cool, autumnal light that softened the harsh edges of the university buildings. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant morning traffic, a thousand smells Izuku realized he had only ever known in brief, sanitized bursts during supervised outings. Izuku was up before his alarm, fueled by a nervous energy that transcended his need for sleep. He methodically went through his morning routine, the DSPLN ingrained from years of hospital schedule adherence. First, his medicine, the white beta blocker swallowed with a large glass of water, followed by his preventative inhaler. He monitored his heart rate on his wrist monitor, steady, 68 beats per minute. He dressed meticulously in a simple, non-constricting dark green hoodie and clean jeans, ensuring nothing felt restrictive around his chest. The emergency bracelet felt cool and light on his wrist. He carefully packed his backpack, the forensic biology textbook, his crisp new notebook, a bottle of water, and the small, sealed pouch containing the emergency nebulizer and rescue medication. Every item was a calculated tool for survival. Before walking out the door of room 4B, he pulled out his phone. Izuku, 8:10 a.m. Good morning, Mum. Heart rate is heading out now for forensic biology. I will call you after class. He didn't wait for her inevitable, immediate reply. He needed to focus on the task ahead, not the anxiety trailing behind. He locked the door behind him and took his first steps down the silent, carpeted hall. The elevator ride was mercifully empty. Stepping out onto the ground floor, he was hit by the first wave of campus life, a rush of motion, chatter, and backpacks. Students were everywhere, laughing, scrambling, and moving with a chaotic speed that made his senses sharpen instantly. He immediately put his plan into effect: follow the low-traffic perimeter. He avoided the central quad, instead taking the sidewalk that hugged the edge of the sprawling campus toward the science building. He walked with a precise, measured pace, a deliberate counterpoint to the hurried hustle around him. To help buffer the sensory overload, he pulled out his earphones and plugged them in. He instinctively chose a song that had anchored him through his last few months of hospital stays, Painkiller, by Rule. The gentle, undulating melody and the soft, reflective lyrics created a cocoon of familiar melancholy, letting the outside world blur into a manageable, distant hum. What's the point of livin' if my heart gets broken? Driving on the road, waiting for head-on collision. The lyrics resonated deeply. He had moved fast, leaving the past behind, and now he couldn't afford to slow down. The walk to the science building was smooth. He located the familiar, flat gray structure exactly where his map indicated. He paused at the main doors, taking a final, deep breath of the autumn air before entering the institutional warmth of the building. The hallway inside was a labyrinth of beige lockers and fluorescent lights. He found the room number Science Hall 103 and, taking another steadying breath, pushed open the heavy wooden door. Science Hall 103, Forensic Biology. The lecture hall was large, tiered like an amphitheater, and already about half full. The air smelled of chalk dust and old lab equipment. Izuku chose a seat halfway up, near the aisle, ensuring easy access to the door and minimizing the risk of being trapped by a crowd. He carefully placed his backpack under the chair and pulled out his notebook and a new set of pens. He was meticulously organizing his space, lining up his pens by color and smoothing the page of his notebook when the first person spoke to him. "Excuse me, is this seat taken? The front rows are completely full already." Izuku looked up into a pair of wide, earnest brown eyes. Standing beside him was a girl with a round, cheerful face, short brown hair, and a bright pink backpack slung over her shoulder. She radiated a kind of open, unaffected warmth that was startling to someone used to sterile distances. "Oh no. No, it's open," Izuku stammered, surprised by the direct social contact. He quickly pulled his arm back from the adjacent desk. "Please, go ahead." The girl beamed, a genuine, blinding smile that made the anxiety in the room recede slightly. "Thanks. I'm Uraraka Ochako. I am so relieved to find a spot. I almost slept through my alarm first-day jitters, you know?" "Midoriya Izuku," he replied, trying to match her energy but only managing a nervous twitch of his lips. Jitters. Uraraka slid into the seat next to him, immediately fumbling with a zipper on her backpack. "Forensic biology is going to be so intense, but I'm excited. I want to specialize in trace evidence. What about you, Midoriya?" Izuku felt a flicker of genuine interest supersede his nervousness. "I'm focusing on forensic chemistry and biology. I'm fascinated by DNA and how time affects evidence integrity." "Ooh, a serious one." Uraraka giggled, clearly not judging. "I like it." Before they could continue their conversation, the scraping sound of a chair being pulled out from the row above them drew their attention. A tall, impeccably groomed young man was descending the steps, his movements stiff and precise, like a character from a military drama. He had dark blue hair, wore thick, square-framed glasses, and was dressed in a pristine, buttoned-up shirt and slacks that looked more suited to a board meeting than a college lecture. The young man stopped directly behind their row. He looked at Uraraka, then at Izuku, and executed a sharp, formal bow. "Pardon my interruption," he announced, his voice loud, formal, and resonant, like a public address system. "I am Ida Tenya. I am observing the seating arrangements, and I must commend both of you on your wise selection of an aisle seat. It maximizes emergency egress and minimizes disturbance during class hours. An efficient choice." Izuku blinked. This was not the typical, mumbled college greeting. Uraraka giggled again, covering her mouth. Thanks, Ida-kun. That's really thoughtful." Ida nodded once, sharply, clearly mistaking her amusement for sincere appreciation. He then slid into the seat directly behind Izuku, immediately pulling out a planner that looked laminated, organized, and probably color-coded by the hour. "Midoriya-kun, Uraraka-san," Ida continued, leaning forward slightly. "As fellow students of the rigorous sciences, I believe we should utilize our proximity to form a study group immediately. Efficiency is paramount. What are your other courses? Izuku felt a nervous smile spread across his face, not from anxiety this time, but from genuine, pleasant bewilderment. He had been terrified of the alienation of the outside world, of the loneliness of being the sickly, quiet boy. Instead, in the span of 5 minutes, he had acquired 2 profoundly different, yet seemingly eager, potential friends. He quickly pulled out his schedule printout. I have criminalistics and general chemistry on Tuesday. Psychology of crime and statistics on Wednesday. Ida leaned closer, his interest piqued. I have general chemistry and statistics and probability as well. Excellent cross-registration. We can coordinate our note-taking strategies immediately. As the classroom door finally swung shut and the lecturer walked to the podium, Izuku felt a strange mixture of lightheartedness and profound relief settle over him. His heart rate was stable. He had navigated the journey, secured a safe position, and, completely unexpectedly, found company. The first step was taken. The fear was still there, but it was now diluted by the presence of Uraraka's warmth and Ida's loud, structured intensity. The chaos of his schedule suddenly seemed manageable, a list of tasks he could tackle alongside these surprising new allies. Maybe, he thought, adjusting his posture to look up at the professor, this isn't just surviving. Maybe this is actually living. The forensic biology lecture was a whirlwind of DNA terminology and statistical probability. Izuku was completely engrossed, his mind absorbing the cold, objective data, finding a kind of solace in the rigorous order of the scientific method. When the class finally ended, the sound of the professor's voice faded, and the rush of students packing up brought Izuku back to the present. Wow, my head is spinning, Uraraka groaned good-naturedly, zipping up her pink backpack. So much talk about allele frequencies. Good thing we have something a little less life or death next, huh? English composition, right? Izuku confirmed, gathering his materials with renewed focus. The sense of stability from the last hour was a precious thing. He needed to protect it. It's in the Arts and Humanities building, room I mapped the quickest route. Lead the way, Midoriya-kun. You're a walking jinx. Uraraka laughed. They navigated the crowded hallways, their conversation about genetic mapping providing a welcome distraction from the surrounding noise. The Arts and Humanities building was older, the hallways echoing and filled with students carrying sketchpads and musical instruments. They located room 215, which was smaller and less tiered than the science hall. Izuku stopped just outside the door, doing his mandatory self-check. Breathing even, heart rate stable, energy level acceptable. He pushed the door open, Uraraka right behind him. And then the stability fractured. Near the back of the classroom, bathed in the sunlight streaming through a large arched window, was a cluster of students gathered around a desk. At the center of the crowd, leaning back in his chair with casual, arrogant ease, was Katsuki Bakugo. He was talking animatedly, a wide, confident grin splitting his face as he gestured with one hand. He was surrounded by 2 other muscular boys, likely fellow athletes, and, predictably, a small group of girls who were laughing at something he just said, their attention rapt. This was not the triumphant figure from the photo. This was a living, breathing, magnetic force of nature, filling the classroom with his presence. Izuku froze in the doorway, the music in his headphones fading to an incomprehensible hum. All the careful, scientific planning of his morning vanished, replaced by the primal, panicked response wired into him since the collapse years ago. Katsuki, alerted by the sudden cessation of movement in the doorway, lifted his eyes. Their gazes locked across the room. It was instantaneous and charged a recognition that was both NTMT and utterly hostile. There was no confusion on Katsuki's face, only a hard, cold flicker of acknowledgement, followed by an immediate, practiced shield of indifference. He didn't sneer, he didn't shout. He simply looked through Izuku. The laughter of the girls around him seemed to amplify the silence of that interaction. The sudden influx of adrenaline slammed into Izuku's chest. The gentle rhythm of his heart monitor gave way to a frantic, erratic drumbeat. The familiar tightness began to seize his throat. Midoriya-kun? Uraraka whispered, immediately sensing his distress. Are you okay? You look pale. Izuku couldn't answer. The room was spinning slightly. He broke eye contact, grabbing Uraraka's arm. "We need to sit down," he managed, his voice barely a rasp. Front row." He practically bolted down the aisle, pulling Uraraka with him, ignoring the curious glances of the other students. He plunged into the first empty desk he could find right by the window, sinking into the seat and leaning forward, burying his face slightly in his arms on the desk. "Hey, wait, what happened?" Uraraka asked, her voice laced with concern. Izuku took 2 quick, shallow breaths, fighting the urge to hyperventilate. He subtly reached into his backpack, his fingers finding the familiar, small pill bottle. He shook out one of the fast-acting anxiety relief tablets, not his beta blocker, just the rescue medication designed to ease the mental stress before it became a full-blown physical crisis. He dry swallowed it quickly, reaching for his water bottle. "Nothing," he lied, pressing his hand against his sternum, counting his rapid heartbeats. "Just dizzy. I got overheated walking over. It's fine now. I just needed to sit down." Uraraka eyed him skeptically but was kind enough not to press. She simply took her seat and began organizing her own notes, casting a few worried glances his way. Slowly, agonizingly, the medication began to work. The electrical panic receded. The chaotic drumming in his chest softened, easing back toward a more controlled rhythm. He lifted his head, forcing a weak but genuine smile at Uraraka. "See? Better," he said. The rest of English composition was a blur. Izuku focused entirely on the professor's monotonous lecture on narrative structure, blocking out the awareness of Katsuki's presence 2 rows behind him. He wrote furiously, determined to prove that his mind was still functional, still capable, despite the body's betrayal. The class ended without incident. Katsuki, flanked by his friends, exited quickly, not sparing Izuku a glance. "Well, that was a close call," Uraraka said as they walked toward the busy university cafeteria for lunch. "You really need to watch that dizziness, Midoriya-kun. If you need to stop, you have to tell me." "I will, thank you, Uraraka-san," he replied honestly. "And thanks for not making a scene." The cafeteria was a vibrant, overwhelming hub of activity, a complete sensory nightmare for Izuku's delicate system. He kept his headphones out, relying solely on Uraraka's chatter to guide him. They managed to secure a small table near the wall, away from the worst of the noise and traffic. They were halfway through a conversation about the pros and cons of using MLA format when a familiar, authoritative voice boomed beside their table. "Uraraka-san. Midoriya-kun. Excellent timing. I have acquired sustenance and a comrade." Ida Tenya stood over their table, holding a neatly arranged tray of food. Beside him stood another boy, tall, striking, with a powerful physique, and the most unusual hair Izuku had ever seen, half bright red, half snow white. His expression was placid, almost distant. "This is Todoroki Shoto," Ida announced, indicating the bicolored boy with a chopping hand motion. "He is also in general chemistry and is demonstrating exceptional analytical skills. A highly valuable study partner." "Hello," Todoroki said simply, his voice low and reserved, before sliding into the seat beside Ida. The 4 of them quickly fell into a conversation about their morning classes, the new group dynamic surprisingly comfortable. Izuku felt a genuine lightness. It was the first time in his life he had simply sat and shared easy company without a nurse or his mother supervising. He was explaining the nuance of DNA degradation over time, feeling intellectually energized, when a familiar, cold sensation prickled the back of his neck. The hairs on his arms stood up. It was the absolute certainty of being watched. Izuku's voice trailed off. He slowly lifted his head, scanning the cafeteria over the edge of his table. He found him immediately. Katsuki was seated at a large, central table across the room with his athletic circle. He wasn't talking, he wasn't eating. He was simply staring. His eyes, narrowed and intense, were fixed directly on Izuku. There was no indifference now, only a deep, burning scowl that seemed to communicate decades of unresolved, toxic history. It wasn't the rage of a 6-year-old, it was the cold, focused hostility of an adult who knew exactly who he was looking at. Izuku felt the familiar panic spike. his hand instinctively pressed against his chest. He immediately dipped his head, pretending to examine the contents of his sandwich, focusing all his energy on the conversation at the table. So, the ethics of using circumstantial evidence is really what concerns me, Izuku mumbled, forcing himself to engage Ida's debate, anything to distract from the focused heat of Katsuki's glare. Didn't look up again, but he could feel the weight of that scowl on him until the moment he and his new friends rose to leave the cafeteria. The silence of the hospital had been replaced by the chaotic noise of the college, but Izuku knew the truth. The most dangerous, unpredictable variable in his new life was now officially seated at the next table, and the Cold War had just begun. The key in the lock turned with a satisfying click, sealing the door to room 4B against the noise and demands of the world outside. Izuku leaned against the wood for a full minute, letting the silence of his small sanctuary wash over him. His first day of college, a monumental, life-affirming victory over his past and his illness, was officially over. He pushed off the door, his movements slower now, the initial rush of adrenaline completely spent. He shucked off his backpack, letting it thud onto the floor, and immediately checked the monitor on his wrist. His heart rate was elevated, dancing near 90 BPM, well above his resting zone, a clear indicator of the emotional stress the day had inflicted. The tiny, insidious flutters he dreaded were just beginning to register, subtle, erratic skips beneath his ribs, warning signs of his arrhythmia reacting to the overload. He walked straight to his small desk, his movements automatic. He poured a glass of water and quickly swallowed his scheduled afternoon dose of his beta blockers, the small tablet a welcome promise of chemical stability. He sat down on the edge of his bed and finally allowed himself to collapse backward onto the comforter. His mind, however, refused the rest. He grabbed his phone, the screen lighting up to reveal a flurry of new notifications. First, his text thread with Uraraka. Uraraka, 3:45 p.m. made it to Psych. So glad we're in the same English class. And Ida-kun is definitely. A lot, but in a good way. Uraraka, 4 p.m. Don't forget, we need to coordinate notes for Chem Lab on Tuesday. Smiley face. Then, the new group chat, Forensic Study Squad, FSS. Ida, 4:15 p.m. Excellent. The formation of the preparatory consortium is complete. Midoriya-kun, please ensure your notes on nucleic acid structure are readily available for immediate cross-referencing. Todoroki, 4:18 p.m. Ida, we just finished class. Ida, 4:20 p.m. precisely. Efficiency does not wait for tomorrow, Todoroki-kun. Izuku scrolled through the light-hearted banter, a genuine, tired smile touching his lips. It was amazing. He had been an isolated patient for 18 years, and now he had real friends who were pulling him into their orbit, treating him like a normal, capable person. Uraraka's easy warmth, Ida's rigorous structure, and even Todoroki's dry, measured presence were exactly the anchors he needed to stabilize his journey. He spent a few minutes saving their numbers and replying to the group chat with a quick affirmation of his readiness to share notes. The feeling of belonging was a soothing balm, momentarily pushing back the darker thoughts. But the reprieve was short-lived. As soon as he set the phone down, the image flashed behind his eyelids. The cafeteria, the crowded tables, the noise, and those eyes. Red, ruby eyes, fixed on him with a depth of scorn and recognition that chilled him to the bone. He closed his eyes, clutching the collar of his hoodie over his chest. He could still feel the faint, chaotic flutters, the heart's visceral reaction to the stress of confrontation. The memory of Katsuki's intense scowl overshadowed the easy laughter of Uraraka and the rigorous debates with Ida. He saw me. Izuku had known, in the abstract, that they were both attending this university. The chances of two young people from the same town, with the same drive, ending up in the same major college were high. But he had convinced himself the campus was vast enough, the student body large enough, that an encounter would be delayed a chance citing weeks, maybe months, into the semester. Time he could use to build up his defenses. He hadn't expected to lock eyes with the ghost of his childhood trauma before noon on the first day. What had made the encounter so terrifying wasn't the anger, which was familiar, but the cold, adult contempt in Katsuki's expression. The hostility had evolved from the raw, childish rage of "you broke my toy" to the calculated, dismissive scorn of "you are still here, and you are still weak." Izuku rolled onto his side, facing the window. He could see the track and field stadium lights faintly visible in the distance, a concrete monument to Katsuki's speed and physical perfection. He let the memories flow, linking the past to the present. A moment of clumsiness, a shattered pewter soldier, and a 6-year-old Katsuki screaming accusations. Izuku's small, frail body reacting to the emotional shock by collapsing, his breathing seizing. The moment cemented the narrative. Izuku is the fragile one. Izuku is the one who breaks under pressure. Izuku confined to the sterile, overprotected world. Katsuki, thriving in the freedom Izuku was denied, channeling his explosive energy into becoming a top athlete, the strongest, the fastest, the most resilient. Izuku outwardly fine, but his heart still prone to failure, studying forensic science to understand the cold logic of fate. Katsuki, seemingly invulnerable, but with a new, icy distance in his eyes, staring across the crowded room at the boy he had long since written off. Why did he look so angry? Izuku wondered, tracing a familiar spot on his chest where the worst flutters often occurred. He won. He escaped. He became exactly who he wanted to be. Why does he still look like I'm an unforgivable offense? The truth, Izuku suspected, was that his very presence here, unbroken, alive, and attending the same university, disrupted the neat, clean narrative Katsuki had built for himself. Izuku was a witness to Katsuki's past cruelty, a living reminder of the moment Katsuki's rage had almost killed his friend. His heart gave a strong, distinct thump, a painful little punch against his ribs, making him gasp slightly. The arrhythmia was definitely settling in, a direct result of the adrenaline crash. He sat up quickly, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He needed to focus on the objective, not the emotional. Control the data. He went back to his desk and pulled out his statistics textbook. He had to prepare for Wednesday's class. He needed to be busy, efficient, and distant. But before he could open the book, his phone pinged again, vibrating against the desk. It wasn't the FSS group chat. It was a private message from his mom. "Mom, 5:45 p.m. Izuku. I was in a meeting all afternoon. I just saw your morning text. Why are you resting now? You should be eating a scheduled meal. Mom, 5:46 p.m. Are you experiencing any dizziness? Any chest tightness? Be honest, my heart is racing just thinking about you alone. Mom, 5:50 p.m. Did you meet any boys who look like they will be rough? Please don't be friends with the athletes. Their energy levels are too erratic." Izuku stared at the last text, a small, weary resignation washing over him. Her anxiety was a compass, always pointing directly at the source of his potential stress. She didn't know what she was worried about, but she knew anyone who carried Katsuki's energy. He sighed deeply, knowing he couldn't lie, but he couldn't tell the full truth either. "Izuku, 5:53 p.m. Hi Mom. I took my meds. I'm okay. No dizziness or tightness. I'm taking a break before I get dinner. My new friends are Uraraka, a girl, Ida, very structured, and Todoroki, very quiet." He deleted the phrase, "I saw Katsuki Bakugo today," and his hatred made my heart skip a beat, before even typing it out. He hit send. He picked up his statistics book, focusing on the formulas for probability distribution. He forced himself to read the complex equations, welcoming the intense mental concentration required to solve them. The probability of a successful outcome. He was trying to calculate his chances of surviving this semester, this university, and this inevitable confrontation with Katsuki. He was a variable in a dangerous equation. Katsuki was the external, chaotic factor, and his own heart was the constant, internal threat. He forced himself to focus on a problem set, blocking out the noise of his history. Focus on the objective data, he repeated. Forensic science deals with the facts left behind, not the emotions that caused them. He needed to approach his entire college life with the same detached, scientific rigor. Katsuki Bakugo was an anomalous data point, an outlier he needed to track, study, and neutralize through careful, premeditated avoidance. He had survived the first day, but he knew with chilling certainty that the true test had yet to begin. The rigorous demands of his forensic science coursework proved to be the perfect, sterile antidote to the emotional poison of the day. Izuku had managed to pull himself away from the looming threat of Katsuki Bakugo's presence by plunging into the deep end of academia. He sat cross-legged on his bed, a textbook propped against his knees, balancing a takeaway container of steamed rice and vegetables, his simple, health-conscious dinner on his desk tray. The gentle, rhythmic tapping of his keyboard as he drafted his English composition outline and simultaneously annotated his forensic biology reading notes created a comforting background hum. His phone, resting beside his textbook, was providing the occasional, welcome interruption from the Forensic Study Squad, FSS, chat. Ida, 6:30 p.m. Midoriya-kun. The second question in the nucleic acid analysis section requires a derivation of the base pairing rule. Are you utilizing the textbook's appendix, or have you located an external resource? Efficiency is key to comprehension. Uraraka, 6:32 p.m. Ada-kun, maybe let Midoriya-kun eat first. Tongue sticking out. Todoroki, 6:35 p.m. Midoriya, the appendix derivation is flawed. I found a clearer explanation in a molecular genetics PDF. Check your email. Izuku smiled, a wave of genuine gratitude washing over him. He was no longer the isolated patient reading alone in a hospital room. He was part of a dynamic, demanding system. He quickly typed his thanks to Todoroki and assured Ida that he was cross-referencing 3 sources to ensure a thorough understanding. The easy camaraderie helped anchor him to the present, practical reality of college life. It was a tangible victory over the emotional chaos Katsuki's sudden reappearance had instigated. By 8 p.m., the heavy lifting was done. The statistics reading was skimmed, the English essay outlined, and the forensic biology chapter annotated. Izuku packed away his tray, put his textbooks neatly back on the shelf, and finally allowed himself to sink back onto his pillows, exhausted but satisfied. He picked up his phone, fully intending to check the weather for Tuesday's walk to the criminalistics lab, but his thumb moved almost instinctively to the social media app. The logical, analytical part of his brain, the part that loved the clean, controlled data of forensic science, was completely overridden by the messy, human compulsion of obsession. He searched the athletics feed again, but this time, he went directly to the user who had posted the photo of the regional qualifier. He clicked on the profile tagged Katsuki Bakugo. It was a public profile, brazenly displaying a life lived without caution or secrecy. Izuku found himself staring at the header photo, a wide, sweeping shot of Katsuki standing on a track, arms crossed, staring down the camera with fierce, unapologetic intensity. He scrolled through the feed, unable to pull away. He saw countless photos from high school. Katsuki mid-sprint, Katsuki lifting staggering amounts of weight in the gym, Katsuki holding various medals and trophies. There were group photos with friends, all of them laughing, their postures radiating the boundless confidence of successful teenagers. The contrast with his own past was agonizing. While Izuku was struggling to keep his heart beating in the confines of his room, Katsuki was conquering the world, moving with a speed and force that defied restraint. Then came the college photos, starting just last week. Katsuki, at a late-night bonfire with his new track teammates, looking both aloof and intensely engaged in the conversation. Katsuki, celebrating in a crowded restaurant after a practice, his expression one of sharp, triumphant arrogance. And then, the pictures that gave Izuku a strange, cold pang of recognition. Photos of Katsuki with girls. They weren't just group shots. There were several photos, posted discreetly but clearly visible, of Katsuki with various students, usually girls, always conventionally attractive, clinging to his arm or leaning close, their expressions soft and admiring. In one photo from a party, a girl with long, dark hair was laughing up at him while he held her chin with a possessive, casual hand. Katsuki didn't look sentimental in any of them. He looked dominant, in control, and utterly cool. He was fulfilling every stereotype of the successful, charismatic college athlete. Izuku felt a complicated, painful knot tighten in his gut. It wasn't jealousy of the attention, but rather a profound sense of distance. The boy he had known, the messy, screaming, emotionally volatile kid who was terrified of having his favorite toy broken, was completely buried beneath this polished, seemingly untouchable facade of masculine success. This Katsuki Bakugo had no visible weaknesses, no signs of the scars Izuku was certain must exist. He was a perfect, unblemished product of the life Izuku had missed. Izuku's thumb hovered over the follow button. He couldn't do it. Following him would be an admission of his continued, painful fixation, a voluntary surrender of his personal distance. He needed to be the scientist observing from a safe removal, not the subject drawn into the flame. He continued to scroll, meticulously archiving the data points: athlete, track team, socially dominant, active partygoer, shows signs of high internal control. He scrolled back to the regional qualifier photo, the one where Katsuki was biting the metal. It was a victory photo, pure and simple. Izuku finally put the phone down, setting it carefully on his nightstand. He lay back down, pulling the comforter up to his chin, but the red, defiant image of Katsuki remained burned onto his retina. He reached up and pressed his hand against his chest again, feeling for the tiny, internal rebellion. The flutters were still there, faint but present, like nervous little taps against his ribs. His phone buzzed immediately, startling him. He looked at the screen, expecting a final, late-night message from Uraraka or Ida. It was his mother. "Mom, 8:45 p.m. Izuku. I was reviewing the college calendar online. I see they have a large track meet this weekend. You are not to go near the stadium. Stay in the library. Do you understand? Mom, 8:50 p.m. Did you check your blood pressure after dinner? Please remember to relax. Your heart needs rest." Izuku stared at the text. Her anxiety was so pervasive it felt telepathic, always zeroing in on the source of the danger, even from miles away. He knew she wasn't just worried about the crowd noise, she was worried about him. He pressed his hand harder against his chest, feeling the small, chaotic thumps under his palm. He took a long, shaky breath. "Izuku, 8:55 p.m. Yes, Mom. I understand. I am resting now. I love you." He powered the phone off, setting the statistics book on the nightstand right next to it. He needed to rest, to prepare his body for the long, complex journey ahead. He was in college to be a forensic scientist, an analyst of truth and consequence. But tonight, Izuku Midoriya was just a lonely boy in a small dorm room, haunted by the memory of a golden boy who had almost broken him, and whose reappearance threatened to shatter the fragile peace he had finally achieved. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, a welcome change from the heavy atmospheric tension of the previous day. Izuku woke naturally, his body adjusting quickly to the rhythm of college life, his mind already cycling through the complex variables of his afternoon lab courses, criminalistics and general chemistry I. With the afternoon lectures and labs scheduled from 2 p.m. onward, the morning was his own, a rare luxury he was determined to use productively, yet safely. He performed his meticulous morning ritual, the medications swallowed, the air purifier humming softly in the background. His heart monitor displayed a steady 72 BPM, a good, restful starting point. He started his day with light exercise, careful not to push his body beyond the limits agreed upon with his doctor. He performed gentle stretches and low-impact calisthenics mostly on the floor of his dorm room, away from the hard physics of gravity and sudden movement. He focused on strengthening his core and stabilizing his respiratory muscles, the constant vigilance a necessity born of his arrhythmia. He practiced his breathing, a measured, deliberate attempt to exert control over the body that had so often betrayed him. Inhaling deeply, exhaling slowly, he forced the tension out of his shoulders, refusing to let the residual stress from his sighting of Katsuki Bakugo yesterday translate into physical harm today. After his exercise, he spent an hour responding to his friends' messages and reviewing the chem lab pre-readings. Uraraka, 9:45 a.m. So nervous for the chem lab. I hear Professor Nishida is a stickler for volumetric precision. Ida, 10 a.m. Uraraka-sen, precision is the foundation of scientific endeavor. Midoriya-kun and I will ensure our procedure is flawless. Midoriya-kun, have you reviewed the safety protocols for the Bunsen burners? Izuku, 10:05 a.m. Yes, Ida-kun. I have the fire blanket location for Lab 207 memorized. We'll be careful. The routine was a blessing, a shield of normalcy. He made himself a simple, large breakfast of oatmeal and fruit, his mind running through the checklist for his afternoon criminalistics lab. Safety glasses, lab coat, clean notebook, and a steady hand for evidence handling. By 12:30 p.m., everything was prepared. He had over an hour before he needed to leave for the science building, and the prospect of spending the entire time cooped up in his room felt stifling. He needed fresh air, and he definitely needed sustenance more exciting than another oat bar. Just a quick trip, he muttered to himself, grabbing his wallet and his light windbreaker. Get out. Controlled exposure to the outside world. He chose the CU convenience store just 2 blocks off campus. It was a familiar, non-threatening environment, brightly lit, efficient, and usually filled with a few quiet locals, not rowdy college students. He walked with his usual measured pace, keeping his earphones in with the music low, maintaining his mental distance from the bustling street noise. The walk was uneventful, and he felt a quiet sense of triumph at having successfully navigated a small mission. He pushed through the sliding glass doors of the CU, the familiar chime and whoosh of the climate-controlled air washing over him. The scent of hot coffee and fried chicken was immediate. He headed straight for the chilled section, his target a specific brand of vegetable and tuna onigiri. He was scanning the labels, his back mostly to the rest of the store, when his peripheral vision registered movement near the refrigerated drink aisle. The light caught a flash of color that was impossible to ignore: ash blonde hair. It was too bright, too distinctive, and too close to be a coincidence. The athletic build, the way the person moved with a confident, almost aggressive economy of motion, it all screamed the name his mind refused to acknowledge. It can't be. This is 2 blocks off campus. It's a large university. It's just another blonde guy. But the rationalizations were paper-thin. Izuku felt his carefully controlled breathing hitch. His heart instantly accelerated, jumping from its comfortable 72 BPM to a frantic, erratic thrumming. He reacted instinctively, primitively. Without thinking, he ducked behind the tall display rack holding packets of instant ramen, a flimsy, ludicrous attempt at camouflage. He crouched low, his knees pressed against the cold floor, his entire body tightening into a coil of panic. He clutched his chest with his right hand, digging his fingers hard into the fabric of his hoodie, desperately trying to physically anchor the chaos inside. The familiar, sickening flutters of the arrhythmia were immediate and brutal this time, a punishing sequence of skips and hard thumps against his ribs. Calm down. It's nothing. Get your breathing back. Inhale. 4. Exhale. 6. He squeezed his eyes shut, the rough texture of the ramen packaging pressing into his cheek. He listened intently, every sound amplified. The gentle thunk of the refrigerators, the distant chatter of the cashier, the rapid, terrified pounding of his own heart. He waited, counting seconds that felt like minutes, desperately trying to convince himself that the blonde hair had belonged to a stranger, a student from another university, a local resident. Anyone but him. He forced his trembling body to relax slightly, easing the pressure on his chest. The initial spike is over. I need to move. I need to get out. He was just beginning to formulate a plan to crawl backward toward the exit when a shadow fell across the aisle, blocking the fluorescent light. The sudden silence in his immediate vicinity was absolute. A voice, low and deep, no longer the high, screeching yell of a 6-year-old, but a cold, resonant baritone cut through the quiet air. It was a voice he hadn't heard clearly in over a decade, yet it was instantly, terrifyingly recognizable. Well, look what the cat dragged in. The voice was laced with a dry, controlled venom, a calculated mockery that was worse than any shout. Izuku froze entirely. Every muscle in his body seized up, locking him in his humiliating position behind the instant ramen. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't even force a sound out of his paralyzed throat. You planning on spending your whole day down there, Deku? The voice continued, moving closer. Or are you actually going to look at me, you damn creep? Izuku knew he had no choice. The logical part of his brain, the one that had prepared for this confrontation, took control, forcing his body into motion. He slowly, stiffly unfolded himself from his crouch, rising to face his tormentor. He stood face to face with Katsuki Bakugo. Katsuki was wearing a simple athletic zip-up jacket and shorts, holding a 2-liter bottle of sports drink loosely in one hand. He hadn't changed clothes since the track photo. He looked powerful, casual, and completely in command of the small space. But it was his face that hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. Those red, ruby eyes, the very ones that had haunted his dreams, were fixed on him now, closer than they had been in over a decade, less than 3 feet away. The eyes were narrowed, holding a dangerous mixture of contempt, aggression, and something Izuku couldn't decipher, a fleeting spark of raw, painful memory. The hostility was intense, focused, and inescapable. Keikaken, Izuku managed, the childhood nickname slipping out like a desperate plea, his voice a strained, high-pitched whisper. Katsuki's jaw clenched immediately at the sound of the nickname. The muscle in his temple twitched. "Don't call me that," Katsuki snarled, the controlled facade cracking just slightly. His voice was cold, heavy with a weight of resentment that had clearly simmered for years. "It's Bakugo. And what the hell are you doing? Are you still playing those pathetic hiding games, you scrawny freak?" Izuku felt the blood drain from his face. The physical reaction to the stress was now overwhelming. The flutters became a sharp, panicked arrhythmia, a fast, erratic skipping sensation that felt like his heart was trying to escape his chest. He clutched his hoodie again, the pressure of his fingers against his ribs the only thing holding him together. I was just getting lunch," Izuku stammered, his eyes darting quickly to the fire exit sign visible at the end of the aisle, calculating the distance. Katsuki took one step closer, his height and sheer physical presence amplifying the feeling of being trapped. He looked down at Izuku, his lip curling into a distinct snarl. "Yeah, sure you were. You're still breathing heavy, Deku," Katsuki said, his eyes dropping briefly to Izuku's chest, where his hand was clutching his heart. The contempt in his gaze deepened. "Same old story, huh? Can't even handle a trip to the store without almost collapsing." He hadn't forgotten. He hadn't forgotten the incident, the collapse, the fragility. Izuku's history was still a weapon Katsuki was ready to wield. The air felt thin, toxic. Izuku swallowed hard, focusing on the emergency exits, focusing on the calm voice of his doctor. "If your heart rate becomes severely irregular, sit down immediately or use your rescue meds." He was at a standstill, utterly exposed, his elaborate structure of preparation and control shattered by a chance encounter in a ramen aisle. "Leave me alone, Bakugo," Izuku whispered, forcing a tone of defiance into his voice he didn't feel. Katsuki merely scoffed, tossing the sports drink bottle lightly from one hand to the other. "Fine. Whatever. Just stay out of my way on campus. Don't think for a second I want to see your pathetic face in my line of sight." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned, his powerful strides carrying him away towards the cashier. He moved with a speed and finality that made it clear the conversation was over, and the dismissal was absolute. Izuku stayed rooted to the spot, leaning heavily against the ramen rack, not moving until the chime of the door signaled Katsuki's exit. He then slowly slid down to the floor, resting his head on his knees, struggling to get his erratic heart rate under control. The onigiri was forgotten. The controlled existence he had built was a lie. The moment he stepped outside his safe room, the proximity principle took over. And Katsuki Bakugo was a catastrophe waiting to happen. The cashier, a kind-faced woman with a name tag reading Takeda, appeared at the end of the aisle, having heard the distinct lack of customer noise followed by the hasty exit. "Dear, are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. She took one look at Izuku, still slumped against the ramen display, and immediately rushed toward him. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you feeling faint?" Izuku forced himself to sit upright, pushing the wave of nausea and fear down. He felt acutely embarrassed, humiliated by the public display of his weakness, compounded by Katsuki's presence. "I'm fine, thank you," he managed, his voice still shaky. He placed his hand on the floor to steady himself. "Just a bit dizzy." My blood sugar dropped, I think. I just need a minute. He kept his hand pressed firmly against his chest. The chaotic arrhythmia was finally starting to submit to the combination of the adrenaline crash and his earlier dose of beta blockers. It was still fast, but the wild, terrifying skipping had lessened. Ms. Takeda watched him, her brows furrowed with doubt. You need to get a cold drink, sweetie. And something with protein. I will, Izuku promised. He cautiously reached into his pocket for the small, emergency pill bottle, shaking out one of the fast-acting anxiety relief tablets he'd used yesterday. He swallowed it quickly, chasing it with a desperately needed gulp of water from his backpack. The physical shame was almost as bad as the fear. He was right, the voice of panic whispered. You can't even handle a convenience store. He forced himself to his feet. He couldn't leave without buying the food, that would look suspicious. He quickly grabbed the first 2 onigiri packets he could find, paid Ms. Takeda with a forced, trembling smile, and practically stumbled out of the store, the chime of the door mocking his retreat. He didn't bother listening to his music on the walk back to the science building. He needed to be hyper-aware. The encounter with Katsuki had thrown his meticulously planned day into chaos, and he was already running behind his calculated schedule. He made it to the science building with 10 minutes to spare, but his heart still hammered with residual fear. He walked the familiar route to the second floor, heading toward Lab 207 for his afternoon criminalistics and general chemistry I double session. He pushed open the door to the holding area outside the labs, and his stomach plummeted. Katsuki Bakugo was there. He was standing against the wall, talking to the 2 track teammates Izuku had seen yesterday, all of them in athletic wear. This time, Katsuki was holding a large, rolled-up poster tube, likely for an architecture or engineering class, a field surprisingly demanding, befitting his intelligence. But Izuku thought, the question a desperate, silent scream in his mind. Why does this huge university feel so small? The chances of 2 freshmen from different faculties having courses in the same specific area of the science building on the same afternoon were statistically improbable, a massive outlier in the probability data he was studying tonight. Katsuki, always aware of his surroundings, immediately caught sight of the green-haired boy hesitating in the doorway. The red eyes narrowed. Katsuki didn't just scowl this time. He made a sharp, audible teeth, a sound of disgusted annoyance, and turned his head slightly, subtly shielding his friends from the sight of Izuku. He then muttered something to his teammates, too low for Izuku to catch, but the body language was clear. Ignore the pest. His 2 teammates, sensing the shift in their leader's mood, briefly glanced at Izuku, then immediately followed Katsuki's lead, turning their backs and resuming their conversation about a weekend training run. The dismissal was agonizingly effective. Izuku felt the rush of heat and shame, but this time, the emotional spike was less acute, perhaps thanks to the rescue medications still circulating in his system. He was numb, more resigned than terrified. Just get in, sit down, and eat your lunch, he coached himself. He is a variable. You are the constant. Do not break. Izuku hurried past the group, slipping into the assigned criminalistics lecture room. He chose his usual safe seat near the aisle, dropped his backpack, and immediately pulled out the onigiri he'd risked his life and heart for. He needed the protein and energy for the upcoming 4 hours of labs. He unwrapped the rice ball, focusing entirely on the texture and taste, forcing himself to chew slowly and deliberately. He finished the 2 onigiri and half a bottle of water in near silence, his eyes fixed on the empty blackboard, avoiding the door. He packed away his trash just as the clock ticked past 1:55 p.m. The door swung open, and 2 familiar figures entered, their arrivals providing a welcome, normalizing distraction. Midori Yakuin. There you are. Ida Tenya strode in, his movements sharp and purposeful, holding his criminalistics textbook like a weapon. He was wearing his glasses, which seemed to intensify the rigor in his expression. Behind him walked Todoroki Shoto, quiet and composed, his dual-colored hair immaculate. Uraraka-san had to skip this session, Ida announced, taking the seat directly behind Izuku. Her elective, Introduction to Music Theory, overlaps with the initial half-hour of the criminalistics overview. A poor scheduling choice, but we must adapt. Hello, Todoroki said simply, taking the seat next to Izuku, opening his notebook with a soft thwack. The conversation immediately shifted to the practical and the objective, Izuku's preferred sanctuary. I finished the pre-lab reading on evidence collection photography, Izuku said, feeling his focus sharpen. The challenge will be accurately maintaining the chain of custody during the mock crime scene setup. Precisely, Ida exclaimed, making a chopping motion with his hand. Any flaw in the custody documentation invalidates the entire sample. We must be meticulous, Midoriya-kun. Zero tolerance for error. Todoroki leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. Ida and I confirmed the chemical inventory for the general chemistry lab. Everything is accounted for, but the volatile agents are in the far cabinet. We should establish a clear communication method for handling disposal. Izuku was instantly engaged, the threat of Katsuki Bakugo momentarily eclipsed by the intellectual demands of his studies. He felt the familiar thrill of collaboration, the joy of being recognized for his mind, not his medical history. They continued to finalize their strategy as the professor walked in and shut the door. The energy in the room was focused, professional, and exhilarating. For a few precious moments, Izuku forgot the sting of Katsuki's gaze, the rush of fear, and the chaotic thump of his heart. He was a forensic science student, prepared, capable, and ready to face the data. The outside world and the angry ghost of his childhood was locked out. He was safe here, in the cold, clear logic of the lab. The end of the day arrived in a rush of chemical fumes and triumphant relief. The 4-hour block of criminalistics and general chemistry I had been grueling, demanding absolute focus and meticulous precision. Izuku had navigated the mock crime scene documentation and the complex titration experiments flawlessly, his careful planning paying off. His mind felt sharp, stimulated by the challenge, even as his body registered the deep fatigue of a full, physically and mentally demanding day. He walked out of the science building alongside Ida and Todoroki, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the stifling warmth of the lab. An exemplary session, Ida announced, his voice ringing with formal enthusiasm. He chopped the air emphatically. The chain of custody protocol we established was flawless, Midoriya-kun. Your eye for detail, particularly noting the fibers on the windowsill, was essential to the case reconstruction. It was basic observation, Izuku replied, though a warm sense of pride bloomed in his chest. You and Todoroki-kun handled the chemical analysis with incredible efficiency. We make a good team. Todoroki simply nodded, his eyes fixed ahead. The error margin on the titration was low. Efficient data collection. They discussed the professor's demanding standards and the complexity of Wednesday's statistics reading until they reached the main quad. Their paths diverged here. Ida and Todoroki headed toward the campus library for an impromptu study session, while Izuku turned toward his dorm building. A good rest is crucial for optimal cognitive function, Ida lectured Izuku sternly. Ensure you get at least 7 hours, Midoriya-kun. See you tomorrow for psychology of crime. Izuku waved goodbye, slipping his earphones in. He chose the slow, reflective melodies of a classical piece, needing to soothe the overstimulated wiring of his brain. His feet, seemingly possessed by a will of their own, led him down the path that skirted the campus edge, the familiar route that took him past the CU convenience store. As he neared the familiar flashing neon sign, he felt his chest tighten, an involuntary, visceral reaction. He paused across the street, letting his gaze drift toward the clean, brightly lit interior. He stood there for a long moment, watching the casual parade of students and locals moving in and out, buying snacks and drinks, their lives uncomplicated by the memory that clung to this spot. Here, barely 4 hours ago, his carefully constructed emotional wall had shattered. He could still hear the low, cold sneer in Katsuki's voice. Can't even handle a trip to the store without almost collapsing. He closed his eyes, leaning his head against a rough concrete wall. He relived the instant terror, the shame of being caught in that humiliating, vulnerable position. The encounter had been a brutal, effective reminder that no matter how many degrees he earned or how many medals Katsuki won, the power dynamic established in their childhood remained fixed. Izuku was the weak one, the one prone to breaking. He opened his eyes, staring at the glass doors. He realized, with a confusing, painful pang, that the dominant emotion wasn't pure fear anymore. It was a swirling mix of grief and raw admiration. He thought back to the difference in Katsuki's voice. It was deep, controlled, and sharp, a stark evolution from the shrieking child. He had grown into every ounce of the potential Izuku had always believed he possessed. The muscular power, the absolute confidence, the effortless charisma that drew people to him. He was formidable. He was everything Izuku had dreamed of achieving. Izuku felt a heavy, sinking realization that hit him with the weight of absolute truth. Katsuki Bakugo wasn't just his childhood tormentor, he had been his whole world. Every game they played, every rivalry, every shouted aspiration, it had all revolved around Katsuki. Izuku's earliest emotional wiring was tied to seeking Katsuki's approval and validation, even when that validation was delivered through explosive rage. To see Katsuki now, so polished, so successful, so devastatingly powerful, was to witness the successful completion of a great work, a work Izuku had been excluded from. The good different he had seen in the track photo was real. Katsuki had forged his weaknesses into titanium strength. A profound, aching loneliness settled over Izuku. The man he had just faced was beautiful, successful, and terrifyingly untouchable. And that man wanted nothing to do with him. Izuku finally turned away from the convenience store, shaking the complex thoughts from his head. He had to eat. He had to rest. He couldn't afford to let this psychological turbulence derail the physical stability he required. He continued the short walk to his dorm building. He greeted the evening campus security guard with a nod and quickly ascended to room 4B, opting for the elevator to minimize physical strain. The relief of closing the door behind him was immense. He was safe now, in his logical, controlled space. His evening routine was a meditative process of self-care. For dinner, he heated up a healthy, prepackaged meal he'd bought yesterday: chicken and steamed vegetables, eating slowly and mindfully, replenishing the energy burned during the long lab sessions. For his medicine routine, he sat at his desk and performed his medical check. He took his nighttime doses, including a prescribed vitamin supplement designed to support his cardiac function. He noted his heart rate, 85 BPM, still slightly elevated, but holding steady. He allowed himself a moment to feel his heart beat, recognizing it not as a fragile failure, but as a resilient fighter. Next, he replied to the FSS chat first, giving a concise summary of the key takeaways from the criminalistics lab, reinforcing his position as a valuable, objective member of the group. Then the inevitable message from his mother. "Mom, 7:30 p.m. I saw your text. How was the chemistry lab? Did you use the safety goggles the whole time? Are you near any strong acids? Mom, 7:35 p.m. Please don't forget to take your calcium supplement. I am thinking of you." Izuku leaned back, composing his reply, choosing his words carefully to soothe her without raising suspicion. "Izuku, 8 p.m. I'm fine. Labs went great. The goggles were perfect. No incidents with acids. Just finishing dinner and resting." He also added a small, white lie. The walk home was very calm. He didn't mention the dizzy spells, the racing heart, or the terrifying face of the boy who had once ruled his world. He had learned long ago that his mother's fear was a heavier burden than his own illness. Finally, he went back to his bed. He scrolled through his phone one last time, checking the athletics feed again, searching for any update on Katsuki's schedule or next track meet. He found nothing new. He turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. He settled under the comforter, his consciousness drifting towards sleep, yet his mind lingered on the two contrasting realities of his life. The daytime reality, Ida, Uraraka, Todoroki, forensic science, and the calm pursuit of knowledge. The inner reality, Katsuki, red eyes, the sound of a broken pewter arm, and the chaotic flutter in his chest. He reached over and gently clutched his heart one last time, focusing on the slow, rhythmic beat beneath his palm. It was steady now, tired, but holding. Tomorrow was psychology of crime and statistics and probability. A day devoted to understanding the unpredictable nature of human behavior and calculating the odds of failure. He knew, intimately, that the odds were stacked against him. But he had survived the first 2 days. He had made friends. He had learned his major obstacle was still present and terrifyingly close. He closed his eyes, allowing the darkness to finally take him, hoping the quiet control of sleep would protect him from the ghosts that walked the campus. The first light of Wednesday morning was a pale gray filtering through the thin curtains of room 4B. Izuku woke abruptly, his internal clock, calibrated by years of early hospital rounds, refusing to acknowledge the leisurely college schedule. He glanced at his phone, 7:15 a.m. His classes, Psychology of Crime and Statistics and Probability, didn't start until 2 p.m. He sighed, pushing his hair back. He tried to sink back into the pillow, but his mind, alert and buzzing, refused to disengage. He needed the rest, but the energy of a new day was already pulling him upward. He decided against forcing more sleep and surrendered to his routine. He took his morning medications, performed his quiet exercises, and measured his breathing. The internal chaos of the previous evening had mostly subsided, leaving behind a dull ache of emotional exhaustion, but his heart rate was stable. He had survived the first contact. As he was stretching, his phone chimed. It was the predictable morning volley from his mother. "Mom, 7:30 a.m. Good morning, Izuku. Did you sleep well? Did you take your temperature? Make sure you have a warm breakfast. Mom, 7:34 a.m. Please remember to review the statistics chapter carefully. Stress from math can elevate your blood pressure. Mom, 7:40 a.m. I love you. Stay inside and focus." He sent a reassuring, slightly vague reply. "Morning, Mom. All checks normal. Working on readings. Love you too," and set his phone down, determined to manage his stress through action, not confinement. By 9 a.m., his academic preparation was complete, his room was tidy, and his breakfast was eaten. He looked at the four walls and felt the suffocating pull of the hospital life he had just escaped. He couldn't spend 7 hours in here waiting for class. The urge to taste the world, to experience normal, mundane life, was overwhelming. He decided. He was going out. He methodically prepared his emergency kit, the inhaler, the anxiety relief tablets, the water bottle, and his wallet. He wore a heavy, neutral jacket to feel protected and secure. He did not text his mother. The guilt was immediate, but the need for freedom was stronger. "Just a quick exploration," he whispered to the empty room. "I'll be back for lunch." He chose the Seisho Mall, a large, multi-story shopping complex several blocks further into the city center. It was a safer bet than the cramped, NTMT spaces near campus. A mall was too big, too densely populated, and too general for a targeted encounter. It was the one place the probability of running into Katsuki Bakugo should approach zero. He wandered the bright, spacious corridors, captivated by the sheer volume of humanity and commerce. He spent time in a bookstore, breathing in the scent of new paper, and then in a gaming store, watching kids laugh over arcade cabinets. The activity was estimulanting but safe, the crowds fluid and non-threatening. He was examining a display of new athletic wear near an escalator, trying to match the fabric composition to the material science he'd read about, when he saw them. They were standing near a sporting goods store entrance, loud and unmistakable. The first boy was tall, with spiky red hair that defied gravity and a sharp, friendly grin. He was gesturing wildly as he spoke. The second had yellow hair streaked with a black lightning bolt design, and he was laughing loudly, his energy matching the redhead's enthusiasm. The third had neat, black hair and seemed to be the more subdued anchor of the trio. The athletes. Izuku recognized them instantly as two of the boys who had been talking to Katsuki yesterday in the English composition class and again in the lab hallway. The bizarre hairstyles, the bright collegiate athletic gear, their distinctiveness was hard to ignore. He immediately turned his back to them, feigning intense interest in a nearby rack of jackets. His heart gave a warning lurch. If they are here, the probability was no longer zero. It was climbing exponentially. Athletes trained together, they ate together, and they ran errands together. The distance was collapsing. He concentrated on his breathing, praying they hadn't seen him. "Kirishima. Dude, you're buying another pack of those socks? You literally just restocked last week." The lightning bolt-haired boy exclaimed loudly, the sound bouncing off the tiled floor. "Hey, a guy needs his compression gear, Kaminari," the red-haired boy, Kirishima, retorted. Izuku edged slowly down the aisle, his eyes wide with panic. He needed to disappear. Before he could fully execute his retreat, a shadow fell over him, a heavy, overwhelming presence that blocked the bright mall light. He smelled a mix of clean laundry, faint sweat, and a familiar, spicy cologne. A voice, low and dangerous, dropped right behind his ear, cutting through the mall's noise like a steel blade. "What the hell are you doing here, Deku?" Izuku's whole body locked up, the blood rushing from his face. He felt the familiar, devastating punch of the arrhythmia, a series of fast, terrified thumps followed by a sickening, prolonged skip. He pressed his hand hard against his chest, clutching the fragile organ as if he could physically force it into rhythm. He slowly, reluctantly, turned around. Katsuki Bakugo was standing there, his face contorted in a deep, weary scowl that spoke of intense annoyance and proprietary disdain. He was in his athletic gear, holding a small, rolled-up poster, his red eyes burning with hostility. Izuku stammered, the words dissolving into useless sound. He couldn't form a cohesive sentence. "But why is he always here? Don't tell me you followed me," Katsuki sneered, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping low so only Izuku could hear. "You know what happens when you get like this, idiot. You're gonna have another one of your little episodes and ruin my day." The raw, contemptuous honesty was brutal. Izuku struggled for air, trying to find the logical, adult part of his brain. I was just... Bakugo! There you are. Kirishima's voice boomed from behind Katsuki, who instantly straightened, his hostile expression snapping back into the controlled indifference Izuku had witnessed in the cafeteria. The three teammates crowded around. "Dude, we've been looking all over for you," the lightning-haired Kaminari said, punching Katsuki lightly on the shoulder. "We were about to head to the food court." Kirishima's gaze then landed on Izuku, who was still leaning awkwardly against the rack, his hand pressed to his chest, looking like he was about to pass out. "Oh, hey, Bakugo, who's this guy?" Kirishima asked, his naturally cheerful expression shifting to mild curiosity. Katsuki sighed, the sound loud and filled with dramatic impatience. He didn't look at Izuku. "Nobody important. Just some guy from one of my useless general classes." Izuku flinched, the casual dismissal cutting him deeper than any insult. But Kirishima, the red-haired boy, was relentlessly friendly. He stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Wait a minute. I recognize you," Kirishima said, a wide, bright smile on his face. "You were in the English comp class with us yesterday, weren't you?" "Yeah. I'm Kirishima Ijiro. Nice to meet you, man." Izuku, still reeling from the heart spasms and Katsuki's venom, instinctively lifted his trembling hand to shake Kirishima's. "Midoriya Izuku. And nice to meet you." Kaminari, the lightning-haired boy, stepped forward next. "And I'm Kaminari Denki. Hey, you looked kinda stressed out yesterday, man. You doing okay? You looked kinda green." Izuku managed a weak nod. The black-haired boy followed, a cool, reserved air about him. "Shiro Hanta. Nice to meet the genius who's going to ace Bakugo in composition. Welcome to the fun." Katsuki let out a low growl, clearly furious at his friends for engaging with the pest, but he said nothing, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Kirishima, oblivious to the toxic tension, clapped Izuku on the shoulder, a sharp, sudden contact that made Izuku's already fragile heart jump. "Awesome. See, Bakugo? More friends for the group," Kirishima said cheerfully. "Anyway, Midoriya, we gotta go grab some food. It was great meeting you. Hope to see you around." They turned to leave. Katsuki paused, casting one final, scorching look over his shoulder at Izuku, a silent promise of future retribution for this unwelcome interaction. Then he stalked off, disappearing with his loud, friendly teammates toward the food court. Izuku remained leaning against the display, struggling to regain his composure. He waited a full 3 minutes, doing slow, deliberate breathing, until he felt his heart settle back to a nervous, but regular, rhythm. He pulled out his phone to check the time. 12:50 p.m. He had spent the morning seeking freedom, only to find the walls closing in tighter than ever before. The probability of avoidance was now completely negated. He bought a prepackaged salad and a small juice box from a nearby store, ate quickly in a quiet corner of the mall, and then walked directly to the university. He would not allow himself another detour. The campus was dangerous, but the outside world, where the proximity principle was inescapable, was proving fatal. He walked into the lobby of the Arts and Humanities building precisely at 2 p.m. He saw Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki huddled near the bulletin board, waiting for class. "Midoriya-kun," Uraraka called out, her smile warm and genuine. "You look exhausted. Did you actually do all the statistics reading?" Izuku managed a weak smile, reaching them. "Something like that, Uraraka-san. Something like that." He was here. He was safe. The chaotic variable had been cited, documented, and temporarily survived. Now, he had 4 hours to devote to the psychology of human motivation and the certainty of numbers. He desperately needed the logic. The afternoon light within the lecture hall for psychology of crime was dim, casting long, dramatic shadows that seemed to suit the dark subject matter. Professor Aizawa spoke in a low, rhythmic drone about the mask of sanity and the subtle behavioral cues that preceded a violent outburst. Izuku took notes with a feverish intensity, his pen flying across the page. He found a strange, clinical comfort in analyzing the darker impulses of the human mind. It made the irrationality of his own life feel like a case study he could eventually solve. When the final bell for statistics and probability rang at 6 p.m., the four of them, Izuku, Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki, spilled out into the hallway, the collective brain fog of a long day beginning to settle over them. "My brain is officially a pile of mashed potatoes," Uraraka sighed, stretching her arms above her head. "If I see one more bell curve, I think I'll cry." "Nonsense, Uraraka-san. The bell curve is the very shape of societal order," Ida countered, though even his robotic hand gestures lacked their usual vigor. He straightened his glasses and looked at the group. "However, the dean has emphasized that a well-rounded student must engage in extracurricular activities to foster community. Have any of you selected a club yet? I have already submitted my application for the debate, society, and the student disciplinary committee." Uraraka cheered up instantly. "I'm thinking of the Space Exploration Club. Or maybe something active, like the dance team." Todoroki, who had been leaning quietly against a locker, spoke up. "I joined the Botanical Society. It's quiet." They all turned to Izuku. "What about you, Midoriya-kun?" Uraraka asked. "With your grades, you could join the Forensic Honors Society." Izuku shook his head gently. "I think I need something less intense than my major. I was looking at the Literature Club. I've always preferred reading when I was away. It's a way to see the world without having to move too fast." Ida nodded approvingly. "A wise choice. Analytical reading sharpens the mind for investigative reporting and forensic documentation. It suits your temperament, Midoriya-kun. Plus, you'd look cute in a library corner with a big book," Uraraka teased, making Izuku flush a bright pink. They walked together to the main gates of Shizuoka Metropolitan University, sharing a few more laughs before the group began to splinter. Ida and Todoroki headed toward the dorms, and Uraraka waved goodbye as she went to meet a friend from her dorm floor. "See you tomorrow, Izuku," she called out. Izuku stood at the gate for a moment, adjusting the strap of his heavy backpack. The evening air was turning sharp and cold, the sky a bruised purple. He felt a sense of accomplishment. He had survived a full day of classes and a terrifying mall encounter. He just wanted to go home, take his meds, and disappear into a book. He began his walk toward the edge of campus, but his heart stuttered before he even reached the corner. Leaning against a brick retaining wall near the campus exit was Bakugo. He looked effortless, one leg hooked back against the wall, his head tilted down as he scrolled through his phone. The glow of the screen illuminated the sharp, handsome angles of his face. Standing in front of him was a girl with long, stylishly curled hair, her face animated as she spoke to him, her hands gesturing toward a flyer she was holding. She was clearly trying to get his attention, perhaps inviting him to a mixer or a club event, but Katsuki wasn't even looking at her. His thumb flicked rhythmically over the glass of his phone, his expression one of bored, stone-cold indifference. Izuku lowered his head, pulling his hoodie up. Just keep walking. Peripheral vision only. He's busy. He won't see you. He focused on the rhythm of his own footsteps. 1, 2, 3, 4. He was almost past them, almost into the safety of the shadows, when the silence was shattered. Hey, Deku! The voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, authoritative command that sliced through the ambient noise of the evening traffic. Izuku froze, his boots skidding slightly on the pavement. He slowly turned his head. Katsuki had pushed himself off the wall, shoving his phone into his pocket. He didn't spare a single glance at the girl he had been listening to. Katsuki-kun? I was still talking, the girl said, her voice rising in a mix of confusion and hurt. Katsuki didn't even turn his head. Yeah, and I'm done listening. Beat it. The girl's face twisted in a flash of pure indignation. She huffed, crumpled the flyer in her hand, and marched away toward the dorms, casting a furious, confused glare at Izuku as she passed. Izuku stood there, stunned. Kaken. She was upset. Why did you do that? Katsuki stalked forward until he was standing directly in Izuku's personal space. He smelled like that same spicy cologne in cold autumn air. Up close, the intensity of his red eyes was suffocating. Who cares? Katsuki snapped. He looked Izuku up and down, his scowl deepening. You ruined my DMN mood today, Deku. First at the convenience store, then that stunt at the mall with my teammates. Now they won't stop asking who the green-haired genius is. Izuku felt the familiar, frantic fluttering in his chest. He clutched his backpack straps until his knuckles turned white. I didn't mean to. I told you I was just out. It was a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences, Katsuki growled. He stepped even closer, his shadow looming over Izuku. Every time I see your pathetic, shaking face, it irritates me. It throws off my focus. And since you're the one who caused the irritation, you're the one who's gonna fix it. Izuku blinked, his brain struggling to catch up with the logic. Fix it? How? Katsuki crossed his arms, his expression shifting into something predatory and demanding. I'm hungry. And I'm tired of the cafeteria food and the idiots at the sports bars. You're gonna pay the irritation tax. You're buying me dinner. Or better yet. He paused, his eyes narrowing as they flicked toward the direction of the student apartments. You're gonna cook something that doesn't taste like cardboard. We're eating at your place. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Izuku felt his heart skip a beat, a genuine, physical arrhythmia spike that made him catch his breath. And my apartment? Izuku squeaked, his voice cracking. Kaken, you can't be serious. My place is. It's small. And I have a routine. I have to take my medicine. I can't just. I don't care about your routine, Katsuki interrupted, his voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. You've been hiding in hospitals and dark rooms for 10 years, playing the victim. If you're well enough to be in my classes and follow me to the mall, you're well enough to handle a guest. Unless. He leaned down, his face inches from Izuku's. Unless you're actually scared of me? The challenge was a physical weight. Izuku looked into those ruby eyes and saw the same boy who used to dare him to jump across the creek, the same boy who demanded Izuku keep up even when his lungs were burning. But behind the aggression, there was something else, a strange, frantic energy, as if Katsuki himself was being driven by an impulse he didn't fully understand. Izuku's mind raced through the risks. Risk A. His mother. If she found out Katsuki Bakugo was in his apartment, she would likely fly across the country and barricade the door. Risk B. His heart. The stress of having Katsuki in his private sanctuary could trigger a major attack. Risk C. The secret. His apartment was filled with the evidence of his fragility, the pill organizers, the emergency oxygen canister in the closet, the medical charts. But then he looked at Katsuki again. He saw the tension in the blonde's shoulders, the way he was waiting for a rejection so he could justify his anger. If Izuku said no, The war would continue in the hallways, in the cafeteria, and in the convenience stores. If he said yes, maybe, just maybe, he could reclaim a fragment of the bond they had lost. Maybe he could show Katsuki that he wasn't just a broken thing anymore. Izuku took a slow, trembling breath, focusing on the count of 4. Fine, Izuku whispered. But I don't have much. Just some rice and some salmon in the fridge. And you have to be quiet. My neighbors are strict. Katsuki's eyebrows shot up, a momentary flash of genuine surprise crossing his features before he masked it with a triumphant smirk. He straightened up, looking satisfied for the first time all day. Rice and fish. Whatever. Better than the grease they serve at the track house, Katsuki said, turning to walk in the direction of the apartments. Move it, Steph. I'm not waiting for you to catch your breath all night. The walk to the apartment building was the longest 10 minutes of Izuku's life. He felt like he was leading a predator into a glass house. Katsuki walked with a heavy, confident stride, his hands in his pockets, occasionally glancing at the buildings they passed with a critical eye. When they reached the building, Izuku's hand shook as he swiped his key card. They entered the elevator in a suffocating silence. Izuku stared at the floor numbers as they climbed, his heart hammering a rhythm that felt like a warning. Beep. 4th floor. Izuku led the way to room 4B. He unlocked the door, his heart in his throat. Wait here, Izuku said as they stepped inside. He immediately moved to the desk, surreptitiously sliding a stack of medical journals over his daily heart rate log. Katsuki stepped into the room and stopped, his presence immediately making the space feel half its size. He looked around, his sharp eyes taking in everything: the neatly made bed, the organized bookshelves, the small kitchenette, and the large window. Figures you'd live in a place this boring, Katsuki said, though he didn't sound as disgusted as usual. He dropped his poster tube and backpack by the door and sat down on the single wooden chair at the desk, his long legs stretching out across the small floor space. Izuku moved to the kitchenette, his hands still trembling. I'll start the rice. He focused on the task, the familiar, domestic sounds of washing rice and clicking the cooker on helping to ground him. Katsuki sat in silence for a moment, watching Izuku's back. Your mom still calls you every 5 minutes? Katsuki asked suddenly. Izuku flinched, nearly dropping the salmon fillet. She worries. You know how she is. Yeah. I know, Katsuki muttered. He stood up and walked over to the bookshelf, his fingers trailing over the spines of the forensic science texts. He stopped when he reached the bottom shelf, where a few non-academic books were tucked away. He pulled one out. It was an old, battered copy of a hero biography they had both obsessed over as kids. You still have this trash? Katsuki asked, but his voice lacked its usual bite. He flipped through the pages, the sound of the paper rustling the only noise in the room besides the hum of the refrigerator. Izuku turned around, his chest tight. I couldn't throw it away. It reminds me of before. Katsuki looked up from the book, his red eyes meeting Izuku's. For a split second, the mask of the arrogant athlete dropped. There was a raw, aching silence between them, 10 years of unspoken apologies, unvented rage, and the heavy, stagnant air of the hospital room that had stood between them for a decade. Before you broke, Katsuki said quietly. Izuku didn't flinch this time. He stood his ground, the steam from the rice cooker beginning to rise between them. I didn't break, Kaken. I just changed. And so did you. Katsuki stared at him for a long beat, then tossed the book back onto the shelf. He sat back down at the desk, leaning his head back against the wall. Whatever. Just cook the fish, I'm starving. Izuku turned back to the stove, a small, tentative hope flickering in his chest. His heart was still beating fast, but the arrhythmia had settled into a steady, manageable thrum. He was hosting a disaster, a ghost, and a hero all at once. And for the first time since he had entered the university, he felt like he was finally standing in the center of his own life. The silence that followed the meal wasn't the sharp, jagged quiet of their usual encounters. It was a dense, domestic stillness, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a siren somewhere in the city. Izuku watched as Bakugo finished the last of the salmon, his movements efficient and surprisingly tidy. Without a word, Bakugo stood up. He grabbed his plate and Izuku's empty bowl, carried them to the small kitchenette sink, and rinsed them with a practiced, brisk motion. Izuku sat frozen at the small table, his heart giving a confused little thump-thump, not out of panic, but sheer bewilderment. "Kaken?" Izuku stammered as Bakugo turned away from the sink. Bakugo didn't answer. Instead, he walked across the small room and dropped onto the edge of Izuku's neatly made bed. The mattress dipped under his weight, and the space suddenly felt even smaller, dominated by the blonde's presence. He leaned back against the wall, his arms crossed, staring at the ceiling. "My old lady is hosting some stupid fundraiser tonight," Bakugo muttered, his voice echoing in the small room. "House is full of screeching extras and important guests. She told me to be on my best behavior or get out. So I got out." Izuku blinked, his hands resting in his lap. "Oh, but your friends? Kirishima-kun and the others?" "Clubs." Bakugo spat the word like it was a curse. "The Hairforbrains and the rest of them are at some sports mixer. I wasn't in the mood to watch Kaminari fail at flirting for 3 hours." He turned his head, his red eyes boring into Izuku's. "So I'm staying here until the guests clear out. Deal with it." Izuku's mouth went dry. Bakugo Katsuki was hiding out in his room. The probability of this happening was so low it shouldn't even exist on a statistical map. Yet here he was. I don't mind," Izuku said softly. "I have homework anyway. You can stay as long as you need." Izuku moved to his desk, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. He opened his statistics and probability textbook, the numbers usually a comfort, but today they felt like a blur. He could feel Bakugo's gaze on his back, a heavy, burning sensation. For 30 minutes, the only sound was the scratching of Izuku's pen and the occasional rustle of Bakugo shifting on the bed. Then, a shadow loomed over the desk. "You're doing that wrong," a voice growled directly over Izuku's shoulder. Izuku jumped, his pen skidding across the page in a jagged blue line. Bakugo was standing behind him, leaning down to look at the equations. "The binomial distribution formula is fine, but your variable for Q is a mess," Bakugo barked, reaching down and snatching the pen out of Izuku's hand. "Look, you idiot! If P is the probability of success, Q has to be the failure. You can't solve for K if you don't even know what you're losing." He began scribbling aggressively on the margin of Izuku's notebook. It wasn't a gentle correction. It was a lecture delivered with the intensity of a drill sergeant. "And this? The English essay?" Bakugo moved to the other pile of papers, his eyes scanning Izuku's draft. "Your essay is weak. You're hedging your bets like a coward." It could be argued that. It is. Take a Dimon's stance, Deku. For the next 2 hours, the room was transformed into a high-pressure study hall. Bakugo didn't just help. He interrogated Izuku's logic, tore down his half-formed arguments, and forced him to rebuild them with more precision. Whenever Izuku got a complex calculation right, Bakugo would just scoff and mutter, "About Dimon time," but the usual edge of hatred seemed replaced by a strange, competitive academic fire. It was the most intense intellectual STMLTN Izuku had experienced in years. In the hospital, the teachers were soft, always worried about his fatigue. Bakugo didn't care about fatigue. He demanded excellence, and strangely, Izuku found himself rising to meet it. In the middle of a particularly heated debate over the ethics section of the forensic biology syllabus, Izuku's phone began to vibrate on the desk. Ping, ping, ping. Izuku glanced at the screen. "Mom, 9:15 p.m. Izuku, you haven't checked in. Is everything okay? Please send me your heart rate." "Mom, 9:20 p.m. I saw on the news there was a minor power flicker in your area. Did the machines stay on?" "Mom, 9:25 p.m. Izuku. Answer me." Usually, these messages would send Izuku into a spiral of guilt and immediate compliance. He would spend 20 minutes soothing her, his heart rate rising from the sheer weight of her worry. He looked at the phone, then looked at Bakugo, who was currently circling a flawed argument in Izuku's ethics paper with enough force to nearly tear the page. "Your mom again?" Bakugo asked, not looking up. Yeah, Izuku whispered. She's still treating you like you're made of glass, Bakugo said, his voice unusually level. You gonna let that phone buzz all night, or are you gonna finish this conclusion? Izuku looked back at the screen. The glass version of himself was the one who answered those texts immediately. The version of himself sitting here, arguing about forensic ethics with Katsuki Bakugo, felt solid. He reached out and flipped the phone face down. I'll call her later, Izuku said, his voice surprisingly steady. Let's finish the conclusion. For the first time in his life, Izuku felt okay. The arrhythmia was a distant thought. The fear of the future was muted. There was only the heat of the lamp, the smell of old books, and the presence of the person who, despite everything, made him feel most alive. The clock on the wall ticked toward 11. The homework was finished, the desk was organized, and a strange, comfortable exhaustion had settled over the room. Bakugo stood up, stretching his arms over his head. His shirt pulled tight across his chest, and for a moment, Izuku was struck again by how much space he occupied, how much life he radiated. Guess should be gone by now, Bakugo said, grabbing his backpack and his poster tube from by the door. He paused, looking at Izuku, who was still sitting at the desk. The room felt suddenly cold as Bakugo moved toward the exit. Hey, Bakugo said, his hand on the doorknob. Yeah. Give me your phone. Izuku blinked, confused, but handed it over. Bakugo tapped at the screen with aggressive speed for a few seconds before handing it back. Don't go thinking this means we're friends, Deku, Bakugo snarled, though the scowl lacked its usual lethal intent. But if you're gonna be in my classes, you're not allowed to be a dumbass. If you get stuck on the chem lab report tomorrow, text me. I don't want to look at your wrong answers in class. It pisses me off. The door clicked shut behind him. Izuku sat in the silence, the echo of the Kaken energy still vibrating in the air. He slowly looked down at his phone. He opened his contacts. At the very top, under the recents and favorites, was a new entry. No last name. No formal title. Just 4 letters that made Izuku's heart skip a beat, a happy, rhythmic flutter that no medicine could replicate. Kaken. Izuku collapsed back onto his bed, staring at the name on the screen. He didn't check his mom's 30 missed messages. He didn't check the FSS group chat. He just traced the letters on the screen with his thumb. He had his number. He had his time. And for one night, the boy who was his whole world had chosen to stay in his. Izuku closed his eyes, a small, genuine smile on his face as he finally drifted into a sleep that was, for the first time in years, completely free of ghosts. The morning after felt like waking up in a different reality. Izuku lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence of room 4B no longer feeling like a void, but a vessel holding the memory of the previous night. The scent of Bakugo's spicy cologne lingered faintly, or perhaps it was just Izuku's mind playing tricks on him. He reached for his phone. The screen was a battlefield of notifications. 11:15 p.m. Izuku. I am calling the campus security. Answer me right now. Mom, 11:30 p.m. Oh, thank goodness. I see you read my message. Why didn't you reply? I haven't slept a wink. My chest is tight just thinking about you. Mom, 7 a.m. I hope you're awake. Please take your pulse and send it to me. I need to know you didn't have a nocturnal episode. Izuku felt the familiar weight of guilt settle in his stomach, but it was countered by a new, stubborn sense of autonomy. He sat up and typed a quick, calm response. Izuku, 7:10 a.m. Good morning, Mom. Sorry I fell asleep early last night. I was exhausted from the labs. My heart rate is 70 BPM. Everything is fine. I have a long day today, so I might be slow to reply. He didn't mention the dinner. He didn't mention the tutoring. Most importantly, he didn't mention the name now saved in his contacts. If Inko Midoriya knew that Katsuki Bakugo had spent 3 hours in this room, the very boy who had been the catalyst for Izuku's original collapse, she would be on the first train to Shizuoka with a medical transport team in tow. For her, Bakugo was a heart attack in human form. For Izuku, the definition was becoming much more complicated. The university was buzzing with Thursday energy. Students were rushing to finish weekly assignments, and the air was thick with the smell of coffee and floor wax. Izuku navigated the hallway toward his forensic chemistry lecture, his mind half occupied by the toxicology readings and half occupied by the possibility of a sighting. He turned the corner near the student lounge and stopped short. A group of athletes was clustered near a set of lockers, their loud laughter echoing off the linoleum. In the center was Bakugo, leaning back against a locker with his arms crossed, looking as sharp and formidable as ever. Kirishima was acting out some play-by-play from a recent practice, while Kaminari and Siro were egging him on. Izuku's heart did its customary dance, a quick, nervous flutter. A few days ago, he would have ducked into the nearest bathroom to hide. Today, he felt the weight of the phone in his pocket. He was a person with Bakugo's number. He was a person who had shared salmon and rice with the Wildcat sensation. He took a step forward, intending to say hello, but then he hesitated. In front of his friends, Bakugo was a king. He was the impenetrable, aggressive force of nature. Would he acknowledge the clumsy Deku in front of the people who saw him as an untouchable icon? Izuku didn't want to risk the rejection. He didn't want to hear a "tch" or a "beat it" in front of a crowd. He decided on a middle ground. As he walked past the group, he caught Bakugo's eye for a split second. Izuku didn't stop, didn't stutter. He simply gave a small, respectful nod, a quiet acknowledgement of their shared evening. Bakugo's eyes narrowed, his expression remaining a mask of bored indifference. He didn't nod back. He didn't even break his scowl. But as Izuku moved past, he heard Bakugo's voice cut through Kirishima's shouting. "Yeah, whatever. Just make sure the handoff is clean next time, shitty hair." It wasn't a greeting, but Bakugo hadn't looked away. He had watched Izuku pass. For Izuku, that was enough of a victory. The day was long and intellectually draining. Forensic chemistry was a deep dive into the molecular structure of poisons, and ethics and philosophy had left Izuku's head spinning with debates about the greater good. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around, his eyes were burning from staring at microscopes and whiteboards. But he had one final task. He walked toward the older wing of the Humanities building, where the club rooms were located. The hallways here were quieter, lined with wooden doors and the smell of old paper. He found room 302, the literature club. The door was slightly ajar. He stepped inside to find a cozy space filled with mismatched armchairs, overflowing bookshelves, and a large communal table covered in literary journals. A quiet, upperclassman girl with glasses looked up from a book. "Can I help you?" she asked softly. I'd like to sign up," Izuku said, feeling a rush of genuine excitement. "I'm Midoriya Izuku. Freshman, Forensic Science." She smiled and pushed a sign-up sheet toward him. "Forensics? That's a heavy major. Most people join us to escape that kind of stress." "That's exactly why I'm here," Izuku admitted, picking up the pen. He was halfway through writing his name when a familiar, heavy footstep sounded in the hallway. A shadow darkened the doorway, and a voice that was both a threat and a comfort made the hair on Izuku's neck stand up. Of course, typical Deku. Always looking for a place to hide behind a bunch of dusty but books. Izuku's pen slipped, creating a small ink blot on the paper. He turned around to find Bakugo standing in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, looking completely out of place in the quiet, scholarly atmosphere. "Kaken!" Izuku gasped. "What are you doing here? This isn't exactly the gym." Bakugo stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the bookshelves with a look of extreme judgment. "The track house is loud, and the library is full of people staring at me. I was looking for a quiet hallway to take a call, and I find you signing your life away to a bunch of nerds." He walked over to the table, looming over Izuku and the sign-up sheet. He leaned down, reading the name. "Literature Club? Really?" Bakugo scoffed, a smirk playing on his lips. "What? The forensic reports weren't boring enough for you? You need to read 500 pages of some guy crying about his feelings in the 19th century? Izuku felt a surge of playful energy. After the tension of the week, this banter felt. It's called classic literature, Kaken. And it's not just about feelings. It's about the human condition. Something you might find interesting if you ever stopped running in circles. Bakugo's eyes flashed, but it wasn't with rage. It was the spark of a challenge. Running in circles? I'm breaking records while you're trying to figure out what some dead poet meant by a yellow wood. It's pathetic. It's not pathetic to appreciate art. Izuku countered, crossing his arms. Besides, I bet you couldn't even finish a book that doesn't have diagrams of muscle groups in it. I could read you under the table, nerd. Bakugo barked, stepping into Izuku's space. I grew up with you, remember? I know exactly what kind of trash you like. You probably want to join so you can find a book that tells you how to grow a backbone. The girl at the desk cleared her throat, looking between the two of them with a mixture of amusement and alarm. Excuse me? This is a quiet zone. Bakugo didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Izuku. Hear that, Deku? You're already failing at being a nerd. You're too loud. I'm loud because you're here. Izuku yelled. Titi. Bakugo straightened up, his smirk widening just a fraction. He reached out and flicked Izuku's forehead, a quick, sharp gesture that felt startlingly like their childhood. Whatever. Sign your name. Just don't come crying to me when you realize the human condition is just a fancy way of saying people are idiots. He turned to leave but stopped at the door. He didn't look back, but his voice was clear. And finish that. Chem lab report. I'm checking it tonight. Don't make me waste my time. He disappeared into the hallway, his heavy footsteps fading away. Izuku stood there for a long moment, his forehead tingling where Bakugo had flicked it. His heart was beating fast. The monitor on his wrist probably would have been screaming, but it felt good. It felt like oxygen. Is he a friend? The girl at the desk asked cautiously. Izuku looked down at the sign-up sheet, finishing his name with a steady hand. It's complicated, Izuku said, a genuine, tired smile on his face. But I think he's the person who reminds me to breathe. He left the club room and walked toward his apartment, the cold air no longer feeling so biting. He checked his phone. No new messages from his mom. Just a notification that his battery was at 20%. He felt like a scientist who had just discovered a new element. It was volatile, it was dangerous, and it could probably blow up in his face at any second. But it was the most interesting thing he had ever found. As he reached his building, he pulled out his phone and opened the chat with Kaken. Izuku, 6:45 p.m. I finished the report. I'm sending you the PDF now. Don't be too mean about the conclusion. He didn't wait for a reply. He walked into his apartment, took his meds, and for the first time since he was a child, he didn't feel like a patient. He felt like a student. He felt like a friend. He felt like himself. The walk back from the literature club had felt like a victory lap, but the moment Izuku stepped into the quiet hallway of his apartment building, the digital world came crashing back in. He leaned against his door, fumbling for his keys, when his phone buzzed with a series of sharp, rapid-fire vibrations. He expected more from his mother, but the top notification was a direct message from Kaken. Kaken, I looked at the PDF. Page 3 is a goddamn disaster. You confused the molar mass of the reagent with the catalyst. Did you lose half your brain cells at the library? Kaken, I'm coming over. I'm not letting you turn in that garbage under my watch. Be there in 10. Izuku's heart did that familiar, jagged little skip, the one that wasn't entirely caused by his arrhythmia. He was coming over. It was becoming a pattern, a terrifying, exhilarating routine that defied every rule Izuku had lived by for 10 years. Then he looked at his kitchen. The countertop was bare except for a single bottle of water and his neatly lined-up pill organizers. He had eaten the last of the salmon for lunch. All that remained in the cupboards were a few packets of plain instant oatmeal and his medical-grade nutritional shakes. Panic, sharp and cold, flared in his chest. He couldn't serve Bakugo, an elite athlete who probably burned 4,000 calories a day, a cup of lukewarm oatmeal. He couldn't be a bad host. Not when Bakugo was actually willingly spending time with him. Convenience store, Izuku whispered to the empty room. Quickly. I can make it. He didn't even drop his backpack. He spun around, locked his door, and practically sprinted back toward the elevator. The night air was colder now, biting at his cheeks as he hurried down the street toward the neon glow of the nearby Family Mart. His lungs, always a bit less efficient than they should be, began to protest the sudden exertion. Inside the store, he moved like a man on a mission. He grabbed 2 high-quality beef and rice bowls from the heated section, a pack of spicy chicken skewers, Bakugo liked spice, a few extra onigiri, and 2 bottles of a high electrolyte sports drink. While standing in the checkout line, he finally dared to look at his phone. Mom, 6:55 p.m. Izuku? You haven't replied to my afternoon check-in. Is the air quality okay today? I saw a report about high pollen counts in Shizuoka. 7:05 p.m. I'm getting worried. Please just send if you're okay. I don't want to call the building manager again. He felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by a new text from Bakugo. Kaken, I'm at your building. Where the hell are you? Izuku paid with trembling hands, grabbed the plastic bags and ran. He knew he shouldn't. Dr. Sato's voice echoed in his head. Sudden spikes in physical exertion are your primary trigger, Izuku. You have to move like the world is slow. But the world wasn't slow. Bakugo was at his door. Bakugo was waiting. For the first time in a decade, someone was waiting for Izuku because they wanted to do something with him, not just because they were checking his vitals. As he rounded the final corner to his apartment building, he saw the silhouette. Bakugo was standing under the bright LED lights of the lobby, staring impatiently at the elevator doors. The doors slid open. Bakugo stepped inside. Wait! Izuku croaked. He pushed his legs harder. His vision blurred slightly at the edges, and a sharp, needle-like pain began to throb in the center of his chest. His heart wasn't beating. It was vibrating, a chaotic, high-speed flutter that made his breath catch in his throat. Kaken! Wait! He reached the elevator just as the doors began to hiss shut. A heavy, athletic hand shot out, jamming the sensor and forcing the doors back open. Izuku stumbled into the elevator, the plastic bags of food crinkling loudly in the small, mirrored space. He leaned against the handrail, his head hanging low, gasping for air that felt too thin to reach his lungs. He knew it was bad. The arrhythmia was in full swing, his heart skipping every third beat, trying to catch up with the demand he had just placed on it. He squeezed his eyes shut, clutching the bags until his knuckles went white. Why did I do that? He thought, his mind racing as fast as his pulse. I'm so stupid. I'm going to have an attack right in front of him. He's going to see me break again. The silence in the elevator was heavy, broken only by the mechanical hum of the ascent and the ragged, wet sound of Izuku's breathing. What the hell is wrong with you? The voice was quiet, but it lacked the usual abrasive edge. It sounded different. Izuku looked up. Bakugo was staring at him, his brow furrowed in a look of genuine, unfiltered worry. He wasn't scowling. He looked almost pale under the harsh elevator lights. Why were you running, Deku? Bakugo stepped closer, his hand hovering near Izuku's shoulder, though he didn't touch him. You're white as a sheet. Stop breathing like that. You're gonna hyperventilate. Fine. Izuku managed, though a cough escaped him, followed by a wheeze. Just didn't want to make you wait. You're a goddamn moron, Bakugo hissed, but he reached out and took the heavy plastic bags from Izuku's hands. You ran for this? For some convenience store trash. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. Bakugo didn't wait for Izuku to move. He hooked an arm under Izuku's elbow, not quite carrying him, but providing enough support that Izuku didn't have to worry about his knees buckling. They made it to room 4B. Bakugo kicked the door shut behind them and practically shoved Izuku toward the bed. Sit. Don't move. Don't even talk, Bakugo commanded. He went to the kitchenette, grabbed a glass, and filled it with water. He marched back and handed it to Izuku. Drink. Slowly. If you puke on your rug, I'm leaving. Izuku took small sips, focusing on the cool slide of the water down his throat. Slowly, agonizingly, the world stopped spinning. The sharp pain in his chest subsided into a dull, familiar ache. His heart rate, while still high, began to find a semblance of a rhythm. I'm sorry, Izuku whispered after a few minutes, his voice sounding small. Shut up, Bakugo said, sitting in the desk chair and tossing the bags of food onto the table. I told you to stop talking. Izuku watched as Bakugo began to unpack the bags. He felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. I went out because I realized I didn't have anything for dinner. I didn't want you to be hungry while we worked on the chemistry report. Bakugo paused, a spicy chicken skewer in his hand. He looked at the food, then back at Izuku. I already ate, Deku, Bakugo said, his voice flat. The track house had a steak dinner tonight. I'm full. Izuku felt the rejection like a physical weight. His shoulders slumped. Oh, I see. I guess I overreacted. I just thought. He trailed off, his voice cracking. He felt foolish. He had risked a cardiac event for a meal that wasn't even wanted. He looked down at his lap, the stutter returning to his thoughts. I'm sorry. I'm such a mess. He felt the bed shift. Bakugo had stood up and walked over, looking down at the spread of food. He saw the look on Izuku's face, the raw, fragile disappointment of someone who was constantly trying to prove they were worth the space they occupied. Bakugo let out a long, dramatic sigh, the kind that usually preceded an explosion. But the explosion didn't come. Well, Bakugo muttered, his voice rough. I guess I could eat a little more. Training was pretty intense today. I'm always burning through fuel. Izuku looked up, his eyes wide. Really? You're hungry? I just said I was, didn't I? Don't make me repeat myself, Bakugo snapped, but he was already reaching for one of the beef and rice bowls. He cracked the lid, the steam rising between them. And move over. I'm not eating at the desk while you sit there looking like a kicked puppy. Izuku scrambled to the side of the bed, clearing a space. Bakugo sat down, actually sat on the bed with him, and started eating with a ferocity that suggested he might actually have been hungry, or was at least a very good liar. He handed a chicken skewer to Izuku. You look like you're about to blow away in a stiff breeze. You need the salt. Izuku took the skewer, a warm, glowing happiness spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with medicine. They sat in a strange, comfortable proximity, the light of the desk lamp casting long shadows against the walls. The report, Izuku said after a few minutes, his mouth half full of rice. You said page 3 was a disaster? A total train wreck, Bakugo confirmed, but his tone was almost academic now. But we'll fix it. After you finish that skewer. If you faint on the keyboard, I'm failing you on purpose. Izuku laughed, a real, genuine laugh. It didn't trigger a cough. It didn't make his heart skip. For the first time since he had arrived at this university, the data of his life was skewed in his favor. He had his books, he had his medicine, and he had the boy who had once been his whole world sitting on his bed, eating convenience store food just to make him smile. He pulled his laptop toward him, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes. Okay, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice steady and full of life. Show me what I got wrong. As they dived back into the world of molar masses and chemical catalysts, the phone on the nightstand buzzed one last time. It was another message from his mother, but Izuku didn't even look at it. He was busy. He was learning. He was finally, truly. The clock on the wall read 10:45 p.m. when Bakugo finally slammed the laptop lid shut with a definitive thwack. The sound echoed sharply in the small room, a PRD at the end of a grueling 3-hour sentence. There, Bakugo grunted, pushing the computer toward Izuku. It's not an absolute dumpster fire anymore. If you still manage to fail after I literally rewrote your derivation of the reaction rate constants, I'm going to personally throw you off the humanities building roof. Izuku stared at the corrected report. Bakugo's help had been a hurricane of corrections, but looking at the screen, the logic was now bulletproof. The math was elegant, the conclusions sharp and biting. It's actually really good now, Izuku whispered, his eyes scanning the equations that Bakugo had helped him refine. Thank you, Kaken. I really appreciate. Shut up, Bakugo interrupted, standing up and slinging his backpack over his shoulder. He looked down at Izuku, his expression a familiar mask of irritation, but his eyes weren't as cold as they had been at the convenience store. It's still barely tolerable. A monkey with a calculator could have done better than your first draft. Don't go getting a swelled head just because you finally learned how to balance a basic equation. It was the closest thing to a compliment Izuku had received from him in a decade. It's barely tolerable. To anyone else, it was an insult, To Izuku, who knew the nuances of Bakugo's aggressive vocabulary, it meant, "I don't hate looking at this anymore." "I'll keep practicing," Izuku said, a small, tired smile tugging at his lips. "Whatever," Bakugo muttered. He headed for the door, his heavy athletic shoes thudding against the floorboards. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the knob, looking back over his shoulder one last time. "And for God's sake, eat the rest of that rice. You look like a ghost." The door clicked shut. The silence that followed didn't just fall, it crashed. The vibrant, chaotic energy that Bakugo carried, the smell of spice, the sound of his rough voice, the sheer physical space he occupied vanished in a heartbeat. Izuku sat on the edge of his bed, his hands folded in his lap, staring at the closed door. The room felt suddenly, agonizingly large. The sterile white walls, which Izuku usually found comforting and clean, now looked cold and institutional. The hum of the refrigerator, which he usually tuned out, sounded like a low-frequency roar in the absence of conversation. A wave of profound sadness washed over him. It was a strange, hollow ache in the center of his chest. It wasn't the sharp pain of his arrhythmia, but a heavy, dragging loneliness. For a few hours, he hadn't been a cardiac patient or a delicate case. He had been a student arguing with a peer. He had been Izuku, not the Midoriya boy. He reached out and touched the spot on the bed where Bakugo had sat. The fabric was still slightly warm. "He was actually here," Izuku whispered to the empty room. He looked at the half-eaten convenience store containers on the table. He should throw them away, clean the surfaces, and return the room to its pristine, safe state. But he couldn't bring himself to do it yet. Those messy plastic lids and used chopsticks were the only physical evidence that the last 3 hours hadn't been a hallucination brought on by his medication. The stillness was broken by the rhythmic buzz of his phone on the nightstand. It had been vibrating intermittently for the last hour, but Izuku had successfully ignored it. Now, in the silence, it felt like a demand. He picked it up. The screen was a wall of blue and white bubbles. "Mom, 10:15 p.m. Izuku. This is my 5th text. I am becoming very distressed. If I don't hear from you in 10 minutes, I am calling the local police for a wellness check. Mom, 10:25 p.m. please, Izuku. I know you're tired, but you know what happens when you don't keep your blood oxygen levels in check. Are you using your monitor? Mom, 10:46 p.m. I'm calling now." Izuku's heart gave a panicked leap. He quickly typed a response, his fingers flying across the glass. "Izuku, 10:47 p.m. Stuff. I'm here. I'm so sorry. I was in a deep study session for chemistry and I left my phone on silent in my backpack. I'm perfectly fine. My heart rate is I'm just about to go to sleep. Please don't call anyone." He waited, holding his breath. A few seconds later, the typing bubbles appeared. "Mom, 10:48 p.m. Oh, Izuku. You scared me half to death. I was already dialing. Please, never do that again. You know you can't afford to be unreachable. What if you'd had a spell? Mom, 10:50 p.m. Go to sleep. I love you. Send me your morning reading as soon as you wake up." He sighed, dropping the phone onto the comforter. The guilt was a familiar, suffocating blanket. He loved her, but her love was a cage built of glass and woofs. She didn't want him to have a life, she wanted him to have a pulse. He swiped away her notifications, revealing the Forensic Study Squad group chat. "Uraraka, 9:30 p.m. guys. I just saw the prompt for the English essay. 1,500 words on the concept of justice in Victorian literature. I'm going to pass out. Help. Ida, 9:35 p.m. Uraraka-san, do not despair. Justice is a structured concept. We shall break it down into 4 thematic pillars. Midoriya-kun, what is your stance on the Dickensian model? Todoroki, 9:40 p.m. I think the justice in those books is usually just luck. I'm going to sleep. Uraraka, 9:45 p.m. Classic Todoroki LO. Izuku? You there? Izuku felt a prickle of warmth. They were looking for him. Not because they were worried he was dying, but because they wanted to know his thoughts on Charles Dickens. It was a beautiful, mundane type of attention. He didn't reply to them either. Not yet. He wasn't ready to rejoin the normal world of his new friends, nor was he ready to surrender to the patient world of his mother. He stayed in the middle, in the quiet, messy aftermath of Katsuki Bakugo's visit. Izuku stood up and finally began to clear the table. He moved slowly, his body feeling the heavy weight of the day's exertion. He went through his nightly medical routine: the pills, the inhaler, the blood pressure cuff. The numbers were all within the acceptable range, a small miracle considering he had run to a convenience store and hosted his childhood rival in the same evening. He climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. He turned his head to the side, looking at his backpack where the chemistry report sat, now a barely tolerable masterpiece. He thought about the way Bakugo had looked when he saw Izuku gasping for air in the elevator. The anger had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked concern that Bakugo had tried desperately to hide. He thought about the way Bakugo had eaten the food just to make Izuku feel better about buying it. The good different he had seen in the photo wasn't just physical. Bakugo was still loud, still aggressive, and still prone to calling him Deku. But the sharp, jagged edges of his personality now seemed to serve a purpose. They were there to push Izuku forward, not just to cut him down. Izuku reached out and tapped his phone screen one last time, looking at the contact name, Kaken. The sadness of the silence began to fade, replaced by a quiet, buzzing anticipation for tomorrow. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was part of something. He was a student, a teammate, a club member, and whatever he was to Bakugo. Tomorrow, Izuku whispered to the dark room. Tomorrow, I'll see him again. He closed his eyes, the image of those ruby-red eyes the last thing he saw before the exhaustion finally pulled him under into a deep, dreamless sleep. Friday morning arrived with the soft, persistent chime of Izuku's alarm at 6:30 a.m. For the first time in years, he didn't wake up with the immediate, crushing weight of medical dread. Instead, there was a spark of purpose. Today was a dual-threat day, the internship prep seminar in the early afternoon, followed by introduction to psychology. He sat up, stretching his limbs cautiously. His heart rate was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat 70 BPM. He felt strong, or at least as strong as a boy with a delicate heart and a history of collapses could feel. He reached for his phone, the screen illuminating the dark room. Bank notification, direct deposit received, 15,000 yen, weekly allowance Midoriya. His mother was punctual as always. Along with the money came the inevitable string of digital tethers. Mom, 6:15 a.m. Good morning, Izuku. I sent your allowance. Please use a portion for high-quality proteins. No instant noodles. I also saw that the weather in Shizuoka is shifting. Please wear your heavier coat. Love you. Yurika, 6:45 a.m. Dekuen. Are you ready for the seminar? I heard Professor Yagi is a legend in the field. Meet us at the gates? Izuku smiled, replying to both with practiced efficiency. He went through his morning routine: meds, inhaler, light stretches, but his mind was already drifting to the empty space on his kitchenette counter. Bakugo had visited twice now. He had complained about the food both times, yet he had eaten it. He had stayed to help with homework. The logical part of Izuku's brain, the forensic analyst, told him that the probability of a third visit was high. And if there was a third visit, Izuku refused to be caught with nothing but convenience store rice bowls. Groceries, he decided. I need actual ingredients. By 9:30 a.m., Izuku was at the local supermarket. He moved through the aisles with a focused intensity, his basket filling with items he usually overlooked: fresh ginger, red chili flakes, high-grade beef, and a specific brand of strong black tea. He found himself checking the nutritional labels not for his own low-sodium needs, but for the caloric density an athlete like Bakugo would require. He was reaching for a bottle of soy sauce when a tall, familiar figure stepped into his peripheral vision. The sodium content in that brand is suboptimal for someone with your history, Midoriya. Izuku jumped, nearly dropping the glass bottle. He turned to find Shoto standing there, holding a basket containing nothing but 3 large packages of buckwheat noodles and a jar of dashi base. Todoroki-kun. You scared me, Izuku gasped, clutching his chest out of habit. I'm not buying this for myself. Well, not all of it. Todoroki's heterochromatic eyes scanned Izuku's basket: the spicy peppers, the heavy beef, the ginger. He blinked, his expression as unreadable as a marble statue. You're planning a high-energy meal. Are you expecting a guest? Izuku felt the heat rise to his cheeks. Just preparing. Just in case. I see, Todoroki said, though he clearly didn't. He looked down at his own basket. I am buying soba. It is the only thing I find worth the effort of cooking. Just soba? Izuku asked, his curiosity piqued. We're at a cafe just around the corner. If you have time, we could grab a coffee? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the pre-seminar reading. Todoroki paused, considering the request as if it were a complex chemical equation. Coffee is acceptable, and I have questions about the psychological profiling chapter. The nearby cafe was quiet, smelling of roasted beans and cinnamon. Izuku and Todoroki sat by the window, their grocery bags tucked under the table. My father wants me to intern at the National Police Agency, Todoroki said, staring into his black coffee. He thinks forensic chemistry is a soft science compared to field investigation. He wants me to be the best, regardless of what I want. Izuku watched him, sensing the heavy shadow of expectation that mirrored his own mother's shadow of fear. What do you want, Todoroki-kun? I want to understand why people break, Todoroki said simply. Not just the physical evidence, but the mental fractures. That's why I'm interested in today's psychology class. They talked for an hour about the ethics of evidence, the burden of family, and the strange, frantic energy of the university. When they finished, Todoroki stood up and pulled a set of car keys from his pocket. I have my car nearby, Todoroki offered. I can take your groceries to your apartment and then drive us to the university. It is more efficient than the bus. Izuku was touched. Thank you, Todoroki-kun. That would be a huge help. The ride was quiet and smooth. Todoroki drove with the same precision he applied to his lab work. After dropping the bags at Izuku's door, Izuku making sure to hide the Kaken contact on his phone as it lit up with a spam notification, they headed to the campus. As they stepped onto the university grounds, they were immediately jumped by a blur of pink and navy blue. Deku-kun. Todoroki-kun. You guys arrived together. Uraraka chirped, bouncing on the ball of her feet. A commendable display of punctuality and peer-to-peer cooperation. Ida added, his arms chopping the air in perfect 90-degree angles. Come. We must secure seats in the front of the auditorium for Professor Yagi's seminar. The auditorium was packed. At the podium stood a man who looked like he was carved from ancient, weathered oak. Mr. Toshinori Yagi was legendary, a former lead investigator for Interpol, now a professor of forensic practice. He was gaunt, his clothes hanging slightly loose on his large frame, but his eyes burned with an indomitable blue light. Young scholars. Yagi's voice boomed, echoing through the hall. The internship is not merely a box to be checked. It is the moment you step out of the sterile lab and into the messy, chaotic truth of the human world. You will be placed in police precincts, medical examiner offices, and private labs. You will see things that cannot be unseen. Izuku took notes so fast his wrist ached. Yagi spoke about the spirit of the investigator, the drive to find the truth even when the evidence is cold and the world is dark. To be a forensic scientist, Yagi said, looking directly into the crowd, is to give a voice to those who can no longer speak. Do not take this responsibility lightly. By the time the seminar ended, Izuku felt as though he could fly. The passion in Yagi's voice had ignited something deep within him. He wasn't just a boy with a bad heart, he was a voice for the voiceless. The group moved from the auditorium to the lecture hall for Introduction to Psychology. As they entered the room, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The back 3 rows were dominated by the track team. In the center, looking like a king on a throne of cheap plastic and wood, was Bakugo. He was surrounded. 3 girls from the liberal arts department were leaning over his desk, giggling and holding out flyers, while Kirishima and Kaminari were loudly debating something behind him. Bakugo looked bored, his chin resting in his hand, his eyes fixed on the window, but he didn't pull away. He simply existed in the center of the adoration. Ugh, look at that, Uraraka whispered as they found their seats in the middle section. The girls will never ever stop fawning over the track athletes. Especially Bakugo-kun. He's like a magnet. He is admittedly handsome in a rugged sense, Ida noted, adjusting his glasses. But his social conduct is severely lacking. He is incredibly cold and distant to anyone outside his immediate circle. Todoroki nodded in agreement. He has the classic profile of a high-functioning antisocial personality. Dominant, brilliant, but emotionally unavailable. A difficult subject for any psychological study. Izuku listened to his friends, his eyes drifting back to the blonde boy at the back of the room. He thought about the Bakugo who had sat on his bed and eaten convenience store food. He thought about the Bakugo who had angrily corrected his chemistry math until it was perfect. He thought about the Bakugo who had looked at him with raw worry in the elevator. He isn't cold, Izuku said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. And he's definitely not distant. Not really. The three of them stopped dead. They turned as one to look at Izuku. Uraraka blinked. Deku-kun, he literally barked at a girl for asking for his line ID 10 minutes ago. He's the definition of a glacier. The way you talk about him, Midoriya-kun, Ida said, his eyes narrowing behind his lenses. It is almost as if you speak from a position of long-term familiarity. Are you two long-time friends? The question hung in the air like a live wire. Izuku felt his heart skip this time, a pure shot of social adrenaline. He looked at Uraraka's curious face, Ida's analytical gaze, and Todoroki's perceptive eyes. He couldn't tell them. Not yet. If he told them they were childhood friends, they would ask why they didn't talk. They would ask about the 10-year gap. They would ask about the Deku nickname. It would open a door to his past that he wasn't ready to lead them through. Izuku looked back toward the back of the room. For a split second, Bakugo shifted his gaze. His red eyes met Izuku's. Bakugo's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. He had clearly heard the conversation. Izuku forced a nervous, fluttering laugh and looked back at his friends, waving his hands dismissively. No way. Izuku said, his voice a pitch too high. We couldn't be longtime friends. Look at us. We are totally opposites. He's the star athlete and I'm me. It was just a lucky guess based on, behavioral observation. Uraraka giggled. True. You guys are like fire and water. Or like a hurricane and a very quiet pond. A logical conclusion, Ida agreed, turning his attention to his notebook as the professor entered the room. At the back of the class, a sharp, audible tissage cut through the air. Katsuki Bakugo turned his head back to the window, his scowl deepening until it was almost a physical weight. He reached into his bag and pulled out his notebook with a violent snap. The lecture began a deep dive into the bystander effect and social categorization. But for Izuku, the only psychology that mattered was the one happening in the silence between his row and the back of the room. He had denied him. He had called them opposites. And as he felt the burning gaze of those red eyes on the back of his neck for the rest of the hour, Izuku realized that while his friends might have been fooled, the hurricane behind him was far from calm. The fluorescent lights of the psychology lecture hall flickered off as the clock struck 6 p.m., releasing the students into the cool, indigo embrace of a Friday evening. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and the distant roar of city traffic. Izuku walked with Ida and Ochako toward the main gate, his footsteps feeling heavy and light all at once. The opposites comment he'd made in class still tasted like ash in his mouth. He felt the weight of his own lie, the way he'd dismissed a decade of shared history just to keep his world from collapsing under the weight of his friends' questions. Well, that was certainly an enlightening session, Ida proclaimed, his hands moving in their habitual, rigid arcs. The concept of the bystander effect is a sobering reminder of our civic duties. We must always be the ones to step forward, Midoriya-kun. I just want to step toward a bowl of ramen, Ochako laughed, pulling her coat tighter. Are you sure you don't want to join us, Deku-kun? We're going to that place near the station. Before Izuku could answer, Shoto pulled up beside them, his keys jingling in his hand. He looked at Izuku with that steady, discerning gaze that always made Izuku feel like he was being read like a forensic report. I'm heading back toward the apartments, Shoto said. I can drop you off again, Midoriya. It's on the way. Izuku's heart gave a sudden, sharp hitch. His eyes drifted toward the red brick wall near the campus exit. There, leaning with a deceptive casualness that radiated a quiet, simmering energy, was Bakugo. He was staring at his phone, the blue light illuminating his sharp features, one leg hooked back against the masonry. He looked like he was waiting. Is he waiting for Kirishima? Izuku wondered, a cold prickle of anxiety and something else, something sharper blooming in his chest. Or is it a girl? Someone from the track team? Someone who isn't opposite to him? The thought was a physical blow. He couldn't go home with Shoto. Not while the possibility of that encounter existed just 50 yards away. Oh, thank you, Todoroki-kun, Izuku stammered, his eyes darting away from the gate. But I actually have to meet my mom. She's in town for a quick visit. I'm meeting her at a cafe near here. The lie felt clumsy, sticking in his throat, but Shoto simply nodded, his expression unchanging. I see. Give her my regards. I'll see you Monday. Bye, Deku-kun. Tell your mom hi. Ochako waved as she and Ida headed toward the station. Izuku stood alone for a moment, watching them leave. He felt a pang of guilt lying to the first real friends he'd ever had, felt like a betrayal of the very spirit of the investigator Professor Yagi had praised. But the gravity of the boy by the wall was stronger than his moral compass. Izuku began to walk toward the gate, his head bowed, his mind a chaotic mess of variables. He kept his eyes fixed on the pavement, counting his steps, trying to convince himself that he was just another anonymous student passing by. He's probably waiting for someone else. Don't look. Just keep walking. Don't let your heart rate spike. He passed the brick pillar, his shoulder barely inches from the blonde boy's space. He was almost clear, almost back into the safety of the shadows, when a sudden, sharp thwack landed on his forehead. Ow! Izuku yelped, stumbling back and clutching his brow. He turned around to see Bakugo standing upright, his phone already tucked away, his eyes narrowed in an intense, mocking scowl. Are you actually that goddamn stupid, or are you just practicing for a career in being blind? Bakugo growled. I've been standing here for 10 minutes, and you walk right past me like I'm a piece of the scenery. Izuku's heart was doing its frantic, erratic dance, the one that usually preceded a flutter. Kaken. I'm sorry. I thought you were waiting for someone else. I didn't want to bother you. Always making assumptions, Bakugo muttered. He stepped away from the wall, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the narrow gateway. Get in the car. We're leaving. Izuku blinked, his brain struggling to catch up. The car? Leaving? To where? I thought you were. I mean, why? Bakugo sighed, a sound of profound, weary irritation. He reached out and grabbed Izuku by the back of his hoodie, steering him toward the student parking lot like a wayward puppy. My old lady called me, Bakugo said, his voice dropping into a low, resentful register. Apparently, your mom called her this morning. They had a nice, long chat about their precious boys. Izuku felt the blood drain from his face. My mom called your mom? Yeah. And because your mom is a nervous wreck, she spilled the beans. She told my mom you're here at this school. And of course, the old hag had to brag that I'm here too. Now they're both in a frenzy because we're together again. Izuku stopped dead in his tracks. The reality of the situation hit him with the force of a cardiac event. His mother, the woman who spent every waking hour worrying about his heart, now knew that he was in the immediate vicinity of the boy she blamed for his original collapse. At that exact moment, his phone began to vibrate in his pocket. It didn't just ping, it erupted. Buzz, 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 buzz. He pulled it out, his hand trembling. The screen was a scrolling nightmare of notifications from Mom, 6:02 p.m. Izuku. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say Katsuki-kun was there? Mom, 6:03 p.m. I just spoke to Mitsuki. I can't believe this. My heart is racing. Is he being mean to you? Did he do something? Mom, 6:05 p.m. Answer me. I am considering driving down there tonight. You shouldn't be near that kind of stress. She knows, Izuku whispered, his eyes wide with horror. No kidding, Bakugo snapped, continuing to walk toward a sleek, dark gray SUV parked in the faculty-adjacent lot. The old hag told me if I didn't bring you over for dinner tonight so she could see for herself that you're not dead, she'd cut off my gas card. So move it, I'm not losing my ride because you're having a mental breakdown in the parking lot. Izuku looked at the car, then at the phone, then at Bakugo. He was caught between two impossible forces, his mother's suffocating fear and Mitsuki's forceful demand. He wasn't in a position to say no. Not to Bakugo, and certainly not to the woman who had practically co-parented him through the fence of their childhood homes. Okay, Izuku said, his voice small. I'll go. The interior of Bakugo's car was exactly like the man himself, clean, powerful, and smelling faintly of that expensive, spicy cologne. Izuku climbed into the passenger seat, his movements awkward and stiff. He felt like an intruder in this high-tech, leather-bound sanctuary. Bakugo started the engine, the low growl of the V6 vibrating through the seat and into Izuku's bones. Without a word, he pulled out of the lot, his hands moving over the steering wheel with a relaxed, practiced competence. He reached over and tapped the infotainment screen, and a melody began to fill the cabin. It wasn't the aggressive rock or loud hip-hop Izuku had expected. It was something softer, a rhythmic, folk-inspired track with a prominent acoustic guitar. The voice was clear and melodic, weaving through the quiet tension of the car. Time, curious time, gave me no compasses, gave me no signs. Izuku leaned his head back against the headrest, watching the city lights of Shizuoka blur past the window. The lyrics seemed to float in the air between them, giving voice to the thoughts Izuku couldn't quite articulate. Were there clues I didn't see? And isn't it just so pretty to think, all along there was some invisible string, tying you to me? The invisible string. Izuku thought about the statistical probability of their reunion. In a country of 125 million people, in a city with dozens of universities, they had ended up on the same campus, in the same department, in the same year. Was it just luck? Or was it, as the song suggested, a thread that had never truly been cut? He glanced sideways at Bakugo. The blonde's profile was sharp against the passing street lamps. He looked focused, his jaw set, but he wasn't yelling. He wasn't sneering. He was just driving. Izuku thought back to their childhood the way they were inseparable until they were suddenly, violently apart. The way Bakugo had been the hero in every one of Izuku's stories, even the ones that ended in bruises. Time, curious time. 10 years of silence. 10 years of Izuku being a patient and Bakugo being a star. And yet, here they were, sitting in a car together, tied by the meddling of their mothers and the inescapable gravity of their shared past. Kaken? Izuku asked softly, over the sound of the bridge. What? Why did you wait for me? Bakugo didn't look over. His grip on the wheel tightened just a fraction. I already told you. The old hag threatened me. Don't go making it something weird. But you could have just texted me the address, Izuku persisted, his heart feeling a strange, warm flutter that wasn't a symptom. You didn't have to stand by the gate for 10 minutes. You didn't have to drive me. Bakugo was silent for a long beat. The song was winding down, the final notes of the guitar fading into the hum of the tires on the asphalt. The traffic is shit on Fridays, Bakugo said, his voice gruff and dismissive. You would have gotten lost or ended up on the wrong bus and had a panic attack in the middle of the street. I don't have time to go hunting for you in the dark. It was a classic Bakugo answer wrapped in an insult, delivered with a scowl, but hiding a kernel of something that looked suspiciously like care. Izuku turned back to the window, a small, secret smile touching his lips. He looked at his phone, which was still buzzing with his mother's frantic texts. He finally typed a quick reply. Izuku, 6:20 p.m. Mom, I'm okay. I'm with Kaken right now. We're going to his house for dinner with Mitsuki-san. I'll call you when I get there. Please don't worry. I'm safe. He hit send and watched the little delivered icon appear. He didn't know what would happen when they reached the Bakugo household. He didn't know how he would explain the last 10 years to Mitsuki, or how he would handle the inevitable confrontation between his mother's fear and his own growing desire for independence. But as the car sped through the night, tied to the boy beside him by a string he was finally beginning to see, Izuku felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Kaken? What now, Deku? The music is nice. Bakugo scoffed, but he didn't change the station. Whatever. Just don't sing along. Your voice is probably as annoying as your face. Izuku just laughed, a soft, rhythmic sound that matched the beat of his heart. The string was there. It was thin, it was invisible, but it was holding. The car pulled into the familiar driveway of the Bakugo residence, the tires crunching over the same gravel Izuku had run across 1,000 times as a child. It felt like a glitch in the space-time continuum, as if the last 10 years of hospitals, white walls, and silence were merely a long, feverish dream, and he was simply coming over after school to play. But the dark gray SUV and the silent, brooding man in the driver's seat were stark reminders that the clock had moved forward. "Get out," Bakugo muttered, though the bite in his voice was softened by a strange sort of resignation. "If you trip on the porch, I'm telling the old hag you did it on purpose." Izuku stepped out, his legs feeling a bit shaky, not from his heart, but from the sheer weight of nostalgia. The house looked exactly the same, right down to the potted plants Mitsuki inevitably overwatered and the sturdy wooden door that had withstood years of Katsuki's explosive exits. Before Bakugo could even reach for his keys, the door flew open. "Izuku! Oh, look at you!" Mitsuki Bakugo didn't walk, she erupted from the house. She looked exactly as Izuku remembered, vibrant, sharp-eyed, and radiating a chaotic maternal energy that was the polar opposite of his own mother's fragile worry. She didn't hesitate, pulling Izuku into a fierce, bone-crushing hug. "You've grown so much. I mean, you're still a scrawny little thing, but you've got height now. And look at those eyes, still as green as ever." "Emitsuki-san," Izuku wheezed, his face buried in her shoulder. "It's good to see you too." "Mom, let go of him before his heart actually stops," Katsuki growled, shoving past them with his backpack. "He's already fragile enough without you squeezing the life out of him." Mitsuki pulled back just enough to deliver a swift, practiced smack to the back of Katsuki's head. "Don't you start with me, you brat," she barked. "I'm welcoming a guest. Something you clearly haven't learned how to do in that fancy university of yours." She turned back to Izuku, her expression softening instantly. "Come in, sweetie. Dinner's almost ready. I made spicy mapo tofu and ginger pork." Katsuki said you needed the protein, even if he said it while complaining about how much you PSS him off. The Bakugo dining table was a battlefield of affection. Masaru, Katsuki's father, sat at the head of the table, offering Izuku a kind, weary smile. "It's good to have you back, Izuku," Masaru said softly. "The house has been too quiet." "It's been plenty loud," Mitsuki countered, ladling a generous portion of pork onto Izuku's plate. "So, tell me everything. How are the classes? Is Katsuki actually studying, or is he just spending all his time at the track?" "The classes are great," Izuku said, feeling a warmth in his chest. "We had an internship seminar today with Professor Yagi. And psychology is. It's really interesting." "And is this brat behaving himself?" Mitsuki asked, gesturing toward her son. "I bet he's being a total nightmare." "Why do you care?" Katsuki snapped, his mouth full of tofu. "He's a big boy, he can handle a seat. Ask him about his own DMN grades." Mitsuki's hand moved with the speed of a pro athlete. "I told you. Do not shout in front of Izuku. He's a guest." Izuku couldn't help it. He started to chuckle, the sound bubbling up until it was a full, bright laugh. It was so normal. The Bakugo household didn't treat him like a patient. They treated him like a part of the chaos. After dinner, Izuku offered to help with the dishes, but Mitsuki shooed him away. "Rest, Izuku. Katsuki, take him upstairs. Entertain him while I call his mother." "Are you kidding me?" Katsuki screamed. "I have a lab report due. I don't have time to entertain anyone." "Katsuki Bakugo." Mitsuki's voice dropped an octave. "Do what I said, or I'm telling your coach you've been skipping stretches." Katsuki let out a sound that was half scream, half growl, and stomped up the stairs. "Fine. Whatever. Move your butt, Deku." Izuku followed, pausing outside the door with the familiar "keep out" sign. He stepped inside and breathed in the scent of cedar and clean laundry. The room was a time capsule. One wall was covered in shelves of medals and trophies. There were posters of 80s rock artists and action figures they had played with as kids. And there, on the corner of the shelf, was the little brass toy Izuku had broken 10 years ago, now repaired, the seam a faint silver scar. "Your room. It's amazing, Kaken," Izuku said, clutching the posters Bakugo had just shoved into his arms, old 80s prints he didn't want. "It's so different from mine. Mine is just white." Bakugo sat on the edge of his bed, his eyes fixed on Izuku. "You were talking big in psych class today," he said, his voice dropping the loud facade. Izuku stiffened. I didn't mean anything by it. "We couldn't be longtime friends because we're totally opposites," Bakugo quoted, his voice dangerously low. "That's what you really think, Deku? Or were you just too scared to tell your new little fan club the truth?" Izuku looked down at the posters in his hands. "I wasn't scared. I didn't want them to look at me differently. If they knew where I came from, or how I ended up in that hospital, they'd stop seeing me as a student. They'd start seeing me as a case again." Bakugo stood up, walking toward the window. "Psychology is a load of crap anyway. All that talk about social categorization. People aren't categories. They're just idiots who make things more complicated than they need to be." "I think it helps," Izuku countered softly. "It helps to understand why things happen. Why people change." Bakugo didn't look back, but his shoulders tense. "People don't change. They just get better at hiding the parts that are broken." "All right, playtime is over," Mitsuki yelled from the bottom of the stairs. "Katsuki, take Izuku back to his apartment. It's getting late and his mother is probably about to call the National Guard." "Are you serious?" Bakugo yelled back, leaning over the banister. "He has 2 legs. He can take the bus." "He is not taking the bus with those heavy posters in the dark," Mitsuki barked. "Get the keys or I'm taking your car away for a week." Bakugo made a sound of pure agony, but he grabbed his keys from the dresser. Izuku turned to Mitsuki and Masaru at the door. "Thank you so much for dinner. To us. It was exactly what I needed." "Anytime, oh sweetie," Mitsuki said, giving him a wink. "And don't let this brat bully you. If he does, you call me and I'll handle him." Masaru offered a shy smile. "Sorry about the noise, Izuku-kun. We're glad you're back." Izuku stepped out into the cool night air, following Bakugo to the SUV. The drive back was quieter than the drive there. The Invisible Strings song had finished, replaced by a low-volume lo-fi beat that filled the cabin. As they pulled up to the apartment building, Izuku checked his phone. "Mom, 10:15 p.m. I just spoke to Mitsuki. She said you ate well. I'm so relieved. Please, get straight into bed. I love you." "We're here," Bakugo said, idling the engine. Izuku gathered his posters and groceries. "Thanks for the ride, Kaken. And for the posters. Everything." Bakugo didn't look at him, but he didn't pull away immediately either. "Whatever. Just don't forget the chem lab session on Monday. And don't stay up all night staring at those stupid posters." "I won't," Izuku promised, stepping out of the car. As the dark gray SUV pulled away, Izuku stood on the sidewalk, watching the taillights disappear. He felt the weight of the posters in his arms, a physical piece of Bakugo's world that he was now allowed to keep in his own. He walked into the lobby, his heart beating a steady, happy rhythm. He was no longer just a shadow in the back of the room. He was a part of the noise, a part of the chaos, and for the first time in a decade, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Saturday morning in Shizuoka was heralded by a soft, golden light that spilled across Izuku's floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time since he had moved into the apartment, the silence didn't feel like a heavy, clinical shroud. It felt like a blank canvas. Izuku sat on the edge of his bed, his morning glass of water in one hand and his pill organizer in the other. He went through the motions, the beta blockers, the vitamins, the quiet monitoring of his pulse, but his eyes weren't fixed on the medical chart on his desk. They were fixed on the cardboard tubes leaning against the wall. Your apartment looks like a hospital ward. It's depressing. Katsuki's voice echoed in his head, blunt and abrasive, yet undeniably honest. Izuku looked around his room with fresh eyes. The walls were a stark, sterile white. The furniture was functional but devoid of personality. The only things on display were textbooks and a small, framed photo of his mother. It was a room designed for a patient, not a 19-year-old university student. He's right, Izuku whispered to the empty room. It's not a home. It's a recovery room. With a sudden burst of energy that felt almost rebellious, Izuku set his water down and stood up. Today wasn't for studying toxicology or reviewing psychological profiles. Today was for reclamation. The first step was the posters. Izuku unrolled them carefully on his bed, weighted down by his heavy chemistry textbooks. They were magnificent high-fidelity prints of legendary 80s rock bands, their colors vibrant and their imagery bold. One featured a stylized lightning bolt over a sprawling city, another a group of musicians in silhouette against a neon-purple sunset. He spent the next hour meticulously measuring the space above his bed and his desk. He used a spirit level to ensure they were perfectly straight, his fingers tracing the thick, high-quality paper Bakugo had just happened to have doubles of. As the last piece of adhesive tape clicked into place, the room transformed. The stark white of the wall was broken by a riot of color and movement. The posters didn't just add decoration, they added a pulse. They were a reminder of the night before, of the chaos of the Bakugo household, of the spicy food, and of the boy who had dared him to be more than his diagnosis. Next came the cleaning. Izuku scrubbed the floors and polished the windows until the morning sun felt twice as bright. He organized his desk, tucking the medical journals into the bottom drawer and leaving his forensics texts front and center. He wanted the room to breathe. While deep cleaning the back of his closet, Izuku's hand brushed against a heavy, taped-up box he hadn't opened since he moved in. He pulled it out, the cardboard scraping against the floorboards. He knew what was inside. It was the old Izuku, the boy who loved heroes with a fervor that bordered on obsession, before the world had become a series of heart monitors and emergency rooms. He cut the tape with a pair of scissors. Inside, wrapped in bubble wrap and old newspapers, was his collection of action figures. He pulled out an All Might figure, the Golden Age costume still bright and iconic. He felt a pang of nostalgia so sharp it was almost physical. He remembered playing with this very figure in the park, Bakugo's Endeavor figure nearby, as they shouted about justice and victory. Kaken kept his, Izuku murmured, thinking of the shelves in Bakugo's room. He didn't hide them away. Izuku realized then that by hiding these figures, he had been hiding a part of himself, the part that believed in strength, in resilience, and in the possibility of being a hero, even if his heroism now took the form of forensic science. I need a shelf, he decided, his eyes shining. A proper one. By 1 p.m., Izuku was at the Shizuoka Central Mall. The Saturday crowd was thick, a sea of families, couples, and students. Normally, the noise and the proximity of so many people would make him anxious, his hand instinctively drifting to his wrist to check his pulse. But today, he felt shielded by a new sense of purpose. He headed straight for a home decor and lifestyle shop. He bypassed the practical kitchenware and went directly to the garden section. I want something that grows, he told himself. He selected a snake plant for its architectural height and a peace lily for its elegant white blooms. But the real prize was a long, trailing English ivy. He imagined the vines draped over his bookshelves, the green leaves cascading down like a living waterfall. Green, he thought. The color of life. My color. He moved on to the furniture section and found a sleek, 5-tier wooden shelf with a dark walnut finish. It was modern, sturdy, and exactly what he needed to display his history. As he pushed the heavy cart toward the checkout, his phone buzzed. Mom, 1:45 p.m. Hello, Izuku. I'm just finalizing my list for tomorrow. I'm coming down on the 10 a.m. train. I'm bringing 3 months' worth of your prescription refills, and I made a big batch of your favorite low-sodium vegetable stew to freeze. See you soon. Love you. Izuku stared at the screen. A week ago, this message would have brought him comfort. Now, looking at the vibrant plants and the shelf in his cart, it felt like a reminder of the ward he was trying to leave behind. She's going to be shocked, Izuku thought. But she needs to see it. She needs to see that I'm living. The rest of the afternoon was a whirlwind of activity. Izuku had the shelf delivered and spent 2 hours assembling it, his brow damp with sweat. He was careful, pausing whenever he felt his heart rate climb, practicing the breathing techniques Dr. Sato had taught him. But he didn't stop. When the shelf was finally standing against the far wall, he began the curation. He placed the action figures on the middle shelves, not cluttered together, but spaced out like pieces of art. All Might was in the center, flanked by the others. On the top shelf, he placed the snake plant, its pointed leaves reaching toward the ceiling. He draped the English ivy over the top of his bookshelf, the vines trailing down past his forensic science texts. He placed the peace lily on his windowsill, where it could catch the afternoon light. Finally, he stood back and surveyed the room. It was unrecognizable. The white walls were now anchors for Bakugo's vibrant posters. The corners of the room were softened by the deep greens of the plants. The shelf was a testament to his childhood and his passions. It was no longer a place where a patient waited to get better. It was a place where a student lived, studied, and dreamed. The air even smelled different, less like antiseptic and more like damp earth and fresh paper. Izuku sat at his desk, opening his psychology textbook to the chapter on identity and environment. He read a sentence that struck him: an individual's surroundings are not merely a backdrop, but an extension of the self. To change one's space is to declare a change in one's soul. He looked at the All Might figure, then at the posters, then at the door where he knew his mother would enter tomorrow. He felt a strange, quiet confidence. He was still the boy with the delicate heart, but he was no longer a boy defined by it. He was a university student with a messy, colorful living room. He picked up his phone and took a photo of the new setup: the ivy, the posters, the figures. For a moment, he considered sending it to the Forensic Study Squad group chat. Then he hesitated. He opened the chat with Kaken. He didn't send the photo. He didn't want to explain. Instead, he just typed a short message. Izuku, 7:30 p.m. I hung the posters. You were right, the room looks better now. See you Monday. He put the phone down, his heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. He watched the shadow of the ivy leaves flicker against the wall in the twilight. Tomorrow, his mother would arrive with her medicine and her worry, but tonight, Izuku Midoriya was exactly who he wanted to be. He was home. The sun on Sunday morning felt different, lighter, perhaps, or maybe it was just the way it caught the vibrant reds and purples of the rock posters now gracing Izuku's walls. The apartment no longer felt like a waiting room for a medical procedure. With the trailing ivy, the organized shelf of hero figures, and the lack of visible heart rate charts, it felt like a sanctuary of a young man with a future. Izuku bustled around the small space, adjusting the All Might figure's stance for the third time. He was nervous. His mother, Inko, was the architect of his safety, the one who had meticulously curated the hospital-style life he had lived for the last decade. He knew her arrival at 10 a.m. would be the ultimate test of his new identity. When the doorbell finally rang, Izuku took a deep breath, checked his pulse, a steady 75, and opened the door. Izuku! Oh, my baby! Inko stood there, laden with reusable grocery bags and a cooler bag that undoubtedly smelled of her famous vegetable stew. She looked exactly as she always did, kind, soft-featured, and perpetually hovering on the edge of a tearful smile. She stepped inside, but as she went to set the bags on the counter, she stopped. Her eyes did a slow, sweeping lap of the room. They lingered on the trailing English ivy, jumped to the shelf of action figures, and finally settled on the bold, aggressive rock posters above his bed. Izuku braced himself. He expected the gasp, the hand over her heart, the frantic questions about overstimulation or dust allergies. Instead, Inko let out a long, shaky breath. A small, genuine smile bloomed on her face. "Oh, Izuku," she whispered, her eyes welling up with happy tears. It's wonderful. It looks like a real home." Izuku blinked, his shoulders dropping 2 inches in relief. "You aren't upset? About the posters? Or the figures?" Inko set the bags down and walked over to him, taking his hands in hers. Upset? Izuku, for 10 years, I've tried to keep you in a bubble to keep you safe. But seeing this, it's progress. It's the first time I've looked at your room and seen you, not just your condition. It means you're finally starting to live for yourself. The morning passed in a blur of warmth. They sat at the small table, eating the stew she had brought, the steam rising between them. Inko talked about her work at the local library and the gossip from their neighborhood, while Izuku shared stories about Uraraka's infectious energy, Ida's rigid DSPLN, and Todoroki's quiet intensity. But as the afternoon sun began to tilt, the blonde elephant in the room became impossible to ignore. The guilt of his secret, the fact that Bakugo had been in this very room twice, began to itch at the back of Izuku's mind like a physical irritation. Izuku stared into his tea, his fingers tracing the rim of the cup. Mom. Yes, honey? There's something I need to tell you. About Kaken. Inko's movement stilled. She didn't panic, but a shadow of gravity crossed her face. She set her spoon down, giving him her full attention. I know he's at the university, she said softly. Mitsuki told me on Friday. I was scared at first. I was worried he would bring back all the stress from before. He's been here, Mom, Izuku blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. Twice. He came over to eat dinner because he didn't want to deal with guests at his house, and then he came over to help me with my chemistry report. He even gave me those posters. He said my room was depressing. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the lecture. He waited for her to tell him that Bakugo was a trigger, that he was too dangerous for Izuku's fragile heart, and that he should keep his distance. The silence stretched on. When Izuku finally opened his eyes, he found his mother looking at him with an expression of profound, heartbreaking wisdom. I know, Inko said quietly. You knew. I knew that if you two were in the same city, you would find each other, she said, reaching across the table to pat his hand. The two of you have always been like two stars caught in the same orbit, Izuku. No matter how much I tried to push you apart for your own safety, I knew I couldn't stop the gravity. She leaned back, her gaze drifting to the all-might figure on the shelf. I'm not going to tell you to stay away from him. I can see it in your eyes, Izuku. You look more alive today than you have in years. If Katsuki-kun is the reason you've started decorating your walls and taking an interest in things again, then I have to trust you. She paused, her expression becoming maternal and sharp. But you must be careful. I know how much you hold him in your heart, Izuku. I've always known. As Inko looked at her son, a thought struck her, one so profound and terrifying that it made her breath catch. She looked at the way Izuku's face softened at the mere mention of Katsuki's name, the way he seemed to vibrate with a quiet, new strength. I spent 10 years terrified that his heart would simply stop beating, Inko thought, her gaze tracing the scar hidden beneath Izuku's shirt. I analyzed every rhythm, every skip, every flutter as a sign of the end. But looking at him now, I realize I was looking at the wrong data. Science told me his heart was weak, but science doesn't understand the nature of the vacuum. He didn't just survive that collapse 10 years ago, he froze in time. His heart didn't fail because it was sick. It failed because the person it beat for, the person who defined its rhythm, walked away. My precious son hasn't been waiting for medicine all these years. He's been waiting for his heartbeat to return. Oh, Izuku, she thought, a pang of sorrow hitting her. You don't just like that boy. Your heart has literally been on life support, waiting for the person who broke it to be the one to fix it. If Katsuki ever denies you again, I don't think there's a doctor in the world who could save you, because you've given him the keys to the only organ keeping you alive. The realization was jaw-dropping. It was the kind of truth a mother sees and wishes she could unsee. Her son wasn't just longtime friends with Bakugo. He was spiritually, emotionally, and perhaps even physically anchored to him. Katsuki was Izuku's real pacemaker. Mom? You okay? Izuku asked, noticing her long silence. Inko shook herself out of her thoughts, wiping a stray tear from her cheek with a laugh. Yes, honey. A mother's thoughts. I'm just so happy to see you smiling like this. The rest of the visit was filled with the practicalities of his care. They organized the new stock of medicine into his cabinet, though Inko noticed with a smile that it was tucked neatly behind his new forensic textbooks. She filled his freezer with enough stew and rice to last a month, making sure to label everything clearly. As 4 p.m. approached, it was time for her to head back to the station. Izuku walked her to the door, the posters of the 80s bands looking down on them like silent guardians of his new life. "Remember, Izuku," Inko said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss his forehead. "Update me. Not just about your pulse, but about your life. Tell me about your classes. Tell me about Uraraka-san's ramen. Tell me if Katsuki-kun is being good to you." "I will, Mom," Izuku promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise." "And Izuku?" She paused, her hand on the door handle. "Don't be afraid to be a little messy. University is for making mistakes. You've spent long enough being perfect and safe. Be a little reckless, just for me." Izuku watched her walk down the hallway toward the elevator. He stood in the doorway until the ding signaled her departure. He walked back into his apartment, the silence no longer feeling cold. He looked at his room, the plants, the posters, the figures. He felt the weight of his mother's words and the hidden depth of her understanding. He reached for his phone. He didn't check his heart rate monitor. Instead, he opened the group chat with the forensic study squad. "Izuku, 4:30 p.m. Hey guys. My mom just left. She brought a ton of vegetable stew. Does anyone want to come over for a study and stew dinner tomorrow night? I have a new shelf I want to show you." He sat back on his bed, the English ivy leaves brushing against his shoulder. The string was still there, invisible, resilient, and stretching out toward the boy who lived a few blocks away. For the first time in a decade, Izuku Midoriya wasn't just surviving. He was flourishing. He closed his eyes, the rhythm of his heart feeling like a song he was finally learning the lyrics to.